Night had settled over the snow-clad battlements of Winterfell in a hush that seemed eternal, as if the ancient castle itself held its breath. Somewhere within those gray walls, in a cold room lit only by a single wavering torch, Brandon Stark closed his eyes and listened for the voices. He was no true warg or green seer, at least not in the sense of legend, but the blood of the first men ran thick and potent in his veins. Sometimes, when the wind was especially fierce and the earth itself seemed to groan, he heard things he could not explain. At first, they had been faint whispers in his dreams, promises of doom, of fire and blood, of dragons screaming in agony. But in recent weeks, the whispers had become a roar, impossible to ignore. He stood by his high window, palm pressed against the icy stone sill, and gazed out upon the courtyard below. A few torches fluttered like trapped fireflies, the watchman's footsteps crunching softly on fresh fallen snow. Winterfell's walls were old beyond measure, older than memory, older than the oldest names. The wind cut across the yard, shifting the flurries about in ghostly shapes. Brandon half wondered if the swirling snow itself was trying to speak. His father, Lord Jorah Stark, had teased him gently about those waking dreams, cautioning him not to indulge in idle superstition. But Brandon knew, deep in his bones, that what he felt was real. The old gods spoke to him through the crypts, through the weirwood in the godwood, and the message had grown dire. A doom was coming to the south, to a place of towering spires and molten rivers, a place he had never seen but knew by name. Valyria, the greatest city in the known world. A cradle of dragons and sorcerers. He leaned forward until his forehead touched the freezing glass of the narrow window slit. There was no doubt in his mind the old gods wanted him to act. But how could a Stark of the North reach across half a world to shake the foundations of that mighty freehold? Even the Targaryens, with all their might and dragons, were but one family among many in Valyria. And he, Brandon Stark, was just one young man among many in Winterfell. Yet the whispers insisted. Their command was a steady drumbeat in his heart, relentless, unyielding, do what must be done. Prevent what must not be. He began to suspect that the impetus of the prophecy wasn't mere happenstance. The old gods did not meddle lightly in mortal affairs. Something far greater must be at stake. On certain nights he saw images, visions that flickered like lightning across the dark canvas of his mind. He saw dead men in armor of ice, tall and silent, marching from the lands of always winter. He saw dragons made of shadow tearing the sky in half. He saw a realm drowned in blood and cold. In every flicker of dream, the name Valyria loomed like a terrible destiny. A knot in the tapestry of fate that needed untying. When the dawn broke, Brandon found himself kneeling beneath the heart tree in Winterfell's godwood. The air was so cold his breath crystallized before his eyes, and the bark of the weirwood was as white as the surrounding snow. The red leaves trembled, though there was scarcely any wind. It felt as if the tree itself were listening. "Why me?" Brandon whispered, placing a hand on the trunk. The face carved into the weirwood watched him with its deep red eyes, as though it might speak at any moment. The old gods never answered in words, but in something deeper, a flicker in the spirit, a chill at the base of the spine. He closed his eyes and sank deeper into the stillness, trying to quiet his racing thoughts. He heard the rush of wind and, behind it, a distant rumble like thunder. Or was it the roar of dragons? Then came an image, a swirling vortex of fire. A city on a peninsula, ringed by tall mountains. Smoldering valleys, the clang of chains, molten rivers of lava. He caught his breath as a deep dread gripped him. The face in the tree seemed to shift. From the corner of his eye, he saw the carved mouth part, and there was a shape in the swirl of leaves behind him, tall and slender, with eyes like chips of ice. He turned, heart pounding, but there was nothing there. Perhaps it was only his fear. When he returned to the great hall, the morning meal was well underway, and servants bustled with trays of bread, salted fish, and hot cider. His father sat in his tall seat, head bent over a parchment. A handful of bannermen had come in the night, complaining of missing livestock and what they feared might be raiders from beyond the last river. Brandon did not speak of his vision. He had learned not to mention such things in company. It brought only worried glances and hushed murmurs. But after the midday meal, while the men trained in the yard, Brandon summoned the courage to approach his father in private. Lord Jorah stood near the stables, watching his horse be saddled for the day's ride. Snow clung to his cloak in thick patches. He turned at the sound of Brandon's boots crunching in the powder, raising an eyebrow as if to say, "What is it, my son?" "My lord father," Brandon said carefully, "I would speak with you about something important." Of the dream. Lord Jorah's stern face softened. He had grown used to Brandon's talk of dreams over the years, but each time it came, Brandon could sense the older man's concern. Lord Jorah folded his arms. "The old gods again?" Brandon nodded. The stable boy led the horse away a few paces to give them privacy. It's about Valyria, Brandon whispered, as though even naming that distant empire might bring doom to their doorstep. A disaster. Something cataclysmic. The old gods say I must prevent it. Or cause it. I'm not certain which. A flicker of confusion crossed his father's eyes. Then a trace of fear. You've never spoken of Valyria before. The Targaryens come from there, do they not? We hear the tales now and then, but it's half a world away. Why would the old gods trouble themselves with the affairs of a southern empire? I don't know, Brandon confessed. But I can't ignore this. I see flame and destruction. I hear a word, doom. The voices, they beg me to act. I think we must bring about that doom, or else something worse will come. Lord Jorah stared at him as if seeing him anew. Brandon expected to be chided, but the man only breathed in slowly, glancing at the sky as though seeking counsel from the old gods himself. Finally he said, I've never told you this, but you weren't the first in our line to speak of such dreams. My grandmother claimed to have visions sometimes, too. Most were small matters, warnings of storms or ill omens. But once she spoke of a chilling presence from the far north and a furnace of flame in the south. She said one must extinguish the other, or both might devour the realm. The revelation struck Brandon like a hammer blow. She spoke of fire and ice? Lord Jorah said grimly. I dismissed it as an old woman's fancy. But now perhaps I was wrong. The corners of his mouth turned down. Still, I cannot see how a single Stark could shift the fates of Valyria. Even if you traveled there, you'd be alone, powerless among dragon lords who bend sorceries older than our house. Brandon looked at his father, heart-hammering. I must find a way. The old gods are telling me something is at stake that dwarfs even the might of Valyria. Something that threatens us all. Perhaps the secret lies in their own magic. If the realm is to be safe, the old gods insist that Valyria must fall. He swallowed. But I don't know how. Lord Jorah exhaled. The wind whipped his cloak behind him, stirring loose a small flurry of snow. Then start with the knowledge we do have. Some say the Targaryens have the power to see the future. Daenerys the Dreamer, it is said, warned her father to flee Valyria before the doom. That is how House Targaryen came to Dragonstone. Go to them. Talk to them. If the old gods truly speak to you, perhaps you'll find allies among the dragonblood. The thought made Brandon's pulse quicken. To travel all the way to Dragonstone? The seat of House Targaryen lay off the coast of the Crownlands, nearly 1,000 leagues from Winterfell. But the dream offered him no other path. He nodded, uncertain yet determined. So it was that Brandon set out before the next moon's turn, with his father's reluctant blessing and a handful of loyal companions. His half-brother, Baron, insisted on coming, along with 3 men-at-arms and a maester named Lucan who had traveled widely. They rode south in a biting wind, leaving behind the white ramparts of Winterfell and the cold familiarity of the north. Brandon felt as though the eyes of the weirwood watched his every step, urging him onward into the unknown. The journey was long and fraught with discomfort, but not especially dangerous. Lords of the Trident showed hospitality upon receiving word that these were Starks on a mission of some import, though Brandon did not disclose the true nature of his quest. The farther south they traveled, the warmer the days became, and soon the snow melted into green fields. Baron teased him that he'd become addicted to the cold and gloom of the north. Brandon smiled but did not laugh. The weight of his visions lay heavily upon him. Still, the southern lands were full of wonders. As they crossed the neck, the marshes extended like a green sea, dotted by reeds and creeping mists. The crannogmen watched them from hidden huts, small figures with amphibious eyes. Maester Lucan regaled them with tales of lizard lions and bog devils. Brandon listened with half an ear, ever mindful of the unrelenting pressure in his mind, the sense that every moment he tarried, the world crept closer to some dreadful fate. At last they passed Moat Cailin and the twins and pressed onward. The sight of the broad, winding Trident River was majestic, its surface gleaming gold beneath the midday sun. They encountered merchants carrying spices from the free cities, knights heading to King's Landing, and small folk hauling their wares to market. All the while, Brandon gleaned scraps of rumor regarding the Valyrian freehold. Whispers of unstoppable armies and monstrous beasts that soared upon the wind. People told hushed stories of Valyrian sorcery, how entire fleets had burned to ash in minutes when they faced the Dragonfire. Yet one rumor caught his ear more than any other. Some said the Valyrian expansion into Essos was meeting unexpected resistance from Shadowbinders and warlocks in the east. It was rumored that certain hidden powers had begun to fear the Valyrian appetite for conquest and dark arts were stirring. Brandon wondered if that was relevant to his mission or only a sign that multiple forces were vying for dominion in that part of the world. Eventually, the small group neared King's Landing and continued along the coast until they reached the Blackwater Bay. From there, they found passage by ship to Dragonstone. The sea crossing was mercifully short, though the waters were choppy. Brandon, no sailor, spent much of the journey gripping the rail and praying for solid ground. When at last the basalt fortress of Dragonstone loomed into view, he felt the same sudden chill that he had felt kneeling before the heart tree. They landed at a small stone quay overshadowed by the imposing fortress perched on the cliffs above. Dragonstone was black against a stormy sky, carved into the shapes of dragons everywhere one looked, dragon gargoyles perched on towers, dragon mouths for gates, scaled tails coiling around turrets. The place seemed alive with half-hidden power. Brandon wondered if the castle itself had once been shaped by Valyrian sorcery. The swirling clouds above did little to dispel that impression. He and his companions announced themselves to the guards, who wore black and red livery. Brandon felt an odd twinge in his gut when he realized those colors were reminiscent of blood on darkness. After some waiting, they were escorted into the great hall where Lord Enar Targaryen, a slender man with silver-gold hair that fell almost to his waist, received them. At his side stood his wife, Lady Elena, just as striking, with violet eyes that appeared almost luminous in the torchlight. Nearby, a small retinue of knights and ladies watched with guarded curiosity. Brandon stepped forward, bowing respectfully. "My Lord Targaryen, I am Brandon Stark, son of Yora Stark of Winterfell." Enar observed him with a slight tilt of his head, like a curious cat. "A Stark of the North. You've traveled far, my lord. What brings you to Dragonstone?" Brandon glanced around. He had practiced his words, but now that he stood in a hall of dragon lords, they suddenly seemed inadequate. "I have had dreams, visions rather. I believe they concern the fate of Valyria. My father suggested that, if any in this world knew of such visions, it would be the Targaryens, who themselves left Valyria under the guidance of Daenerys the Dreamer." At the mention of Daenerys, Lord Enar's expression darkened somewhat, though Brandon could not say why. Lady Elena stepped closer, her eyes flicking over him with keen interest. "And you believe your dreams foretell some event in Valyria?" "Yes," Brandon replied. The weight of the old gods pressed upon him. He forced himself not to look away. "Something dreadful. A doom." Enar's mouth grew tight. "My ancestors fled Valyria when Daenerys warned of such a calamity. That was many years ago. Yet I've heard no news of any disaster unfolding. The freehold thrives as ever, or so the latest ships from Lys and Pentos claim." Brandon nodded, feeling suddenly uncertain. "The doom has not yet occurred. But it must, or so my visions say. If Valyria does not fall, then a greater horror will be unleashed upon the world. My father suspected that you might know how it could be brought about, or if such a thing even can be done." Enar looked to his wife. A pregnant silence filled the chamber. A few courtiers shifted uncomfortably. Finally, Lady Elena spoke. The prophecy of Daenerys the Dreamer was specific. She saw towers crumbling and volcanoes spewing forth flame, saw dragons screaming in torment. "We believed that was an inevitable cataclysm, not something that we ourselves should cause. We only knew we must escape it." Brandon's heart pounded, for the pictures in his own mind matched hers far too closely. The roar of flames, the shattering of stone towers. He took a small step forward. "My dreams suggest it's no natural calamity," he said. "It's needed as though the world demands it. The old gods themselves." "You speak of the old gods as if they are not ours," Enar murmured. "We worship the seven now, though some of my family still hold to the Valyrian gods. Still, we Targaryens do not doubt that prophecies come from places beyond mortal ken. Let us speak privately of this matter." And so Brandon was invited to dine with Lord Enar and Lady Elena in a smaller solar high in one of Dragonstone's towers. The meal was modest but sumptuous by northern standards: fresh fish, lemon cakes, honeyed fruits. Baron and the others were lodged in comfortable guest chambers, relieved to have warmth and rest. Brandon, however, found his appetite vanished. Only once the servants withdrew, leaving the three of them alone in a chamber lit by flickering candles and a single brazier, did he dare speak freely. He told them of the dreams that plagued him, the whispering voices, the glimpses of a city in flames, the sense that if the doom did not occur, something far worse would stride across the earth, an icy darkness, a terror beyond mortal comprehension. Enar and Elena listened with grave faces. The occasional roar of the wind outside lent the conversation an eerie undertone, as if the castle itself were a living witness. "You wish for Valyria to be destroyed," Elena said, her voice carefully measured. Brandon bristled. "I do not wish for the deaths of thousands. I only know that if Valyria endures, they will unlock some horror or bring it upon us by their unending ambition. My dreams hint at forces stirring in the far north, others in the far east, something that will converge upon us all." The old gods are certain Valyria must not stand. Lord Enar set down his cup of wine. In the soft glow of the brazier, his silver hair glimmered with faint red highlights as though stained by fire. If indeed the cataclysm is fated, how do we ensure it happens? We Targaryens left with only 5 dragons. Even if we wished to fight Valyria, it would be suicide to pit ourselves against the might of the Freehold. Unless, the cataclysm was never about mortal war. Daenerys saw volcanoes. She saw nature itself ripping Valyria apart. Elena's voice trembled, though her gaze was fierce. We have kept old texts. My mother and father found them in the catacombs of Dragonstone in hidden vaults built when we first arrived. Some speak of the 14 flames, the volcanic mountains that surround Valyria, and how the Valyrians harnessed them with sorcery. They carved roads of obsidian, built forges in the hearts of those mountains. The texts say the magic that binds the land is dangerous, that it can be unbound. For a moment, Brandon forgot to breathe. Unbound. That was the flicker he had seen in his nightmares, molten rock bursting from the depths of the earth, entire mountains erupting in a chain of unstoppable devastation. His stomach turned. Unbinding such forces could destroy Valyria entirely and everyone in it. Enar's face was solemn. It would be an atrocity unparalleled. But if your visions are true, if Daenerys' vision was true, then the Freehold is already doomed. This might only be bringing forward the inevitable. Yet how to do it? We Targaryens are cast-outs, exiles. We have no seat in Valyria, no presence. Even if we sailed there, we'd be watched, possibly killed. Brandon weighed the risk. I do not know. But the old gods demand it be done. Perhaps we can find a hidden way. Magic to spur the 14 flames' fury. Something in your texts or among the sorcerers of the East. If the old gods have called for it, maybe they will guide us. Elena studied him with an intensity that made him flush. You speak with conviction, Brandon Stark. Either you are mad or you truly carry the weight of the gods. We Targaryens have always trusted in our dreams as we did with Daenerys. I will show you the texts. If there is a way, we shall find it. Thus began a strange period in Brandon's life. He lingered on Dragonstone for many moons, delving into half-forgotten scrolls that the Targaryens had brought with them from Valyria. Some were in High Valyrian, some in cryptic dialects. Maester Lucan helped where he could, though he, too, struggled with certain passages. Brandon found references to binding spells used by Valyrian pyromancers to shape the lava flows, to quell volcanic activity so they could mine the precious metals of the 14 flames. The texts hinted that reversing those spells, unbinding the land, would cause unthinkable devastation. Late at night, Brandon sometimes woke drenched in sweat. His dreams had become more vivid, more brutal. He would see the peninsula of Valyria bursting apart in a chain reaction, mountains exploding, cities swallowed by fire and ash. The screams would echo in his ears long after he opened his eyes. Even in waking, guilt and dread gnawed at him. He could think only of the countless innocent people who dwelled in Valyria, confident in the might of their dragon lords. Was there truly no other way? He found no comfort, only the resolute certainty of the old gods. On nights when the moon was slim and the wind howled, he would swear he heard them whisper, "Sacrifice is demanded. The realm must be saved. The greater terror is waiting. If you do not act, all shall burn or freeze." Brandon would clutch the weirwood tokens he carried, carved by a woodsman in Winterfell, and pray for strength. In time, Elena uncovered a clue deep in a locked chest, a fragment of parchment describing a ritual that required the blood of a dragon lord, performed at specific points around the volcanic mountains. The text was incomplete and the instructions were riddled with archaic references. But the implication was clear enough. Using the secrets of Valyrian sorcery, one could stoke the fires beneath the earth beyond control. When they showed the fragment to Enar, he wore a haunted expression. Are we truly to do this? Even if this is the will of your old gods, Brandon, can we truly undertake such devastation? My forebears fled Valyria to avoid the doom, never did they speak of causing it. Brandon's voice wavered with raw honesty. I hate it as much as you do. But if I do nothing, the visions warn me that Valyria will expand its power. They will wake something older than the first men, older than the children of the forest. A darkness. Perhaps in their arrogance, they will tear the veil between life and death. Or perhaps they will push too far north, provoke the wrath of the great other I cannot see. But the old gods show me an endless night if Valyria stands. He realized he was trembling. Elena reached for his hand, not in affection, but as if to share the burden. Their eyes met. Then we must do this unspeakable thing, she said softly. But not alone. So the plan took shape. A small band would infiltrate Valyria, traveling in secret. A Targaryen with the pure bloodline, likely Elena, would perform the ritual with guidance from Brandon's visions if they could refine the instructions. The rest would serve as guards and lookouts. They would have but one chance. If they were discovered, it would mean death. Indeed, it might be death regardless, for who could say if the land's fury would not claim them all. Beren raged at the idea of letting Brandon go alone, and so it was settled that the younger Stark brother would accompany him. Maester Lucan insisted on coming as well, though Brandon feared the mission was too perilous. "Knowledge is what I serve," Lucan said. "If the fate of the known world is at stake, I must bear witness." Enar, for his part, could not leave Dragonstone unguarded, so Elena would go in his stead. She had the calmer spirit, the steadier mind for arcane matters. At first, some questioned if a woman could hold the necessary power for the ritual, but Elena quashed their doubts with a hard stare. "Our blood is our blood. The magic will know no difference." They waited until the new year before setting sail for Lys, the city of pleasure and trade. Officially, they posed as merchants and lesser lords traveling to do business in the free cities. Enar provided them with enough gold to purchase a swift ship and hire a crew loyal to the Targaryen name. None were told the full truth, only that House Targaryen sought discreet passage to the Valyrian peninsula for private matters. Brandon found himself pacing the deck at night, scanning the horizon for any sign of watchers. He half expected dragons to descend from the clouds, but Valyria's dragons presumably remained closer to the mainland. The crossing was nerve-wracking. Storms lashed the ship, and at one point a mast cracked in rough seas. Still, they pressed on, eventually landing in Lys under the cloak of darkness. Lys was a city of marble palaces and perfumed gardens, of coin and flesh peddlers. The Lyseni had strong trade ties to Valyria, and ships sailed regularly between the city-states and the freehold. Brandon's party found lodging in a modest inn and, through cautious inquiry, arranged passage on a merchant galley heading to Valyria's southern ports. Posing as wealthy travelers with an interest in purchasing Valyrian steel items, they boarded. The days at sea were fraught with tension. Brandon took to staring at the swirling patterns of the waves, searching for omens. Elena prepared her mind for the rituals, rereading the fragment over and over until the words etched themselves into her memory. Beren kept a watchful eye on any potential threat. Maester Lucan tried to calm them with small jokes, but even he could not conceal his anxiety. They were going to the heart of the Dragon Lord's empire with the express aim of committing mass cataclysm. No sense of normalcy could soften that. As they neared the Valyrian peninsula, the water grew warmer, tinted by volcanic minerals. The skyline glowed at night with the distant reflection of molten rivers. For all that, Valyria was breathtaking. Tall towers of fused stone, wide causeways lined with sphinxes, palatial estates perched on cliffs overlooking fiery valleys. Dragons nested in rookeries near the mountains. The city itself sprawled across multiple ridges and plateaus, connected by black bridges arching over rivers of lava that ran slow and heavy. Brandon felt a knot in his stomach just gazing upon the grandeur. This was a civilization that dwarfed anything in Westeros. Upon disembarking at the harbor, they found themselves amid throngs of people, slaves carting goods, nobles riding palanquins, sorcerers draped in embroidered robes. The air smelled of sulfur. The architecture was both elegant and ominous, blending artistry with an undercurrent of power. Brandon's party carried forged documents stating they were emissaries of a wealthy patron in Lys, come to negotiate the purchase of Valyrian steel. The locals barely gave them a second glance. Foreigners were not uncommon here, though most were from Essos, not Westeros. They took rooms at a modest hostel near the outer quarter. At night, they conferred in hushed whispers about how to reach the 14 Flames. The peninsula's volcanic ridges were heavily guarded, as many mines and forges were located there, belonging to various noble families. The worst part was they had to find not just any portion of the mountains, but specific sites where the ritual must be conducted. According to the fragment, at the seat of each flame, an offering of blood must be made. The text implied a sequence, multiple points that needed to be unbound in unison to trigger the chain reaction. That would require them to split up or spend days traveling from peak to peak, risking detection at every step. They debated traveling in smaller teams or all together, ultimately deciding that splitting up might be the only way. Brandon and Beren would handle the eastern ridges, while Elena and Maester Lucan would tackle the western slopes. They would time their actions so that the final unbinding occurred simultaneously or as close to it as possible. Each group carried a scrap of the ritual instructions etched onto a small slip of parchment, along with a Valyrian steel dagger, for the ritual demanded a cut of Dragonlord's blood. Elena, as a Targaryen, bore that essential lineage. Beren and Brandon did not, but Brandon hoped the old god's power in his blood might somehow suffice if it came to that. They set out at dusk, each group cloaked against the sulphurous air and traveling as quietly as possible along lesser-known roads. Brandon's heart pounded with every step. Patrols of dragon riders sometimes soared overhead, shadows crossing the red sky. The land itself seemed alive, rumbling beneath their feet at intervals. Smoke columns drifted from fissures in the blackened slopes. The knowledge that all this magnificence, all these mighty towers, might soon be swallowed by the earth weighed on him like a cold lead blanket. Yet the voice of the old gods was insistent, urging him on, reminding him of the nightmares of ice and death that would come if Valyria endured. After 2 nights of cautious travel, Brandon and Beren reached an ancient mining outpost hugging the flank of one of the flames. By then, they had circled wide to avoid the main roads, surviving on dried provisions. Beren's face was smeared with soot, Brandon's cloak was crusted with volcanic dust. They pressed on until they found a hidden tunnel that seemed disused. Smiths and miners likely once quarried obsidian here, but it had been abandoned when richer veins were discovered deeper in the mountains. Inside, the air was stifling, the rock walls hot to the touch. They used covered lanterns to light their way. The instructions on the parchment suggested they needed to reach a spot where a natural lava flow intersected the old mine workings. There, Beren would draw the necessary runes in chalk, while Brandon recited a portion of the incantation. Then Beren would cut Brandon's arm with the Valyrian steel dagger. Once the blood fell onto the molten rock, the unbinding at the site would be initiated. "Gods," Beren muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. "You're sure we must do this?" Brandon stared grimly at the red-orange glow up ahead, at the place where the molten river snaked through a jagged fissure. "We must." His voice sounded hollow in his own ears. They proceeded carefully, crossing a narrow ledge that overlooked the lava. The heat battered them like a physical force. As Beren began to mark the rock wall with the runes, borrowed from Valyrian glyphs and combined with strange symbols gleaned from the fragment, Brandon felt a surge of dizziness. He grasped the rock for support, flashes of visions spilling through his mind. The entire mountain range erupting, unstoppable waves of fire. The weirwood's face seemed to loom in the darkness of his mind's eye, silently watching, silently judging. "Brother," Beren whispered urgently, having completed the chalk lines. Brandon nodded, swallowing his nausea. He gripped the parchment, which contained lines in High Valyrian as well as an old tongue-speak that Lucan had identified as possibly relating to the Rhoynish or even the Great Empire of the Dawn. He began chanting the words, haltingly at first, then with growing conviction. With each syllable, it felt as though a chord in the air vibrated, resonating with something deep beneath the earth. At the climax of the chant, Beren placed the steel dagger against Brandon's forearm. Brandon clenched his teeth and gave a curt nod. The blade bit flesh, hot pain blossomed, and blood welled forth. They let the droplets fall onto the molten river below, where they sizzled into vapor almost immediately. A low rumble resonated through the chamber. The rock beneath their feet trembled. "Is that?" Beren started. Before he could finish, a deafening crack echoed. The ledge began to shift. "We have to go," Brandon shouted over the roar of splitting stone. They fled back along the tunnel, nearly stumbling as the ground shook violently. Smoke poured from new fissures opening in the walls. Though they had followed the text exactly, the immediate reaction seemed more severe than they had anticipated. Fear spurred them onward until they burst out of the tunnel into the open night air. The mountainside was rippling, as if the stones themselves were breathing. A great plume of ash rose behind them, but this was just one of the many flames, a single sight among the chain of peaks. Brandon prayed that Alina had succeeded in her portion of the ritual, and that she was safe. They scrambled away from the collapsing outpost and took refuge behind a large boulder. The trembling subsided to a low rumble that persisted ominously. "7 hells?" Beren breathed, pressing a shaking hand to his chest. "We did it, didn't we?" Brandon's arm throbbed where the knife had cut him. He stared at the glow in the sky. "One sight, yes. There must be others. Alina will handle them with Lucan's help." He felt cold sweat on his brow despite the sweltering heat. "The final step. We must meet at the crater known as the Hell's Mouth. That's where the last words of the incantation must be spoken in unison." "In unison?" Beren repeated. "How?" Brandon held up a second slip of parchment, containing the final lines. They needed to recite it at the same moment, thereby linking the separate unbindings into one cataclysmic chain. That had always been the plan. The question was how to time it precisely across miles of volcanic ridges. A near impossible task unless Brandon used the power of the old gods. He had planned to slip into a warg-like trance at a weirwood, if any such thing existed in Valyria. But Valyria had burned or cut down most weirwoods in Essos, or so the histories said. A grim realization weighed on him. "We must find a hidden heart tree," he murmured, "or something akin. The children of the forest once ranged far, even into Essos in the distant past. I only hope one still stands." Baron frowned. "In Valyria? I have to try." Brandon closed his eyes, leaning against the rock. The swirling images in his mind parted slightly, and he glimpsed the memory of an old glade, lost to time. He thought it might lie near the southwestern ridges. The dream had shown him a gnarled white trunk. Perhaps it was no real weirwood, but a cousin species that once grew in Essos. Regardless, he was certain the old gods had placed it in his path. If he could reach it, he could slip into that dream communion and call out to Alina across the distance, binding their actions. Baron, weary as he was, recognized Brandon's expression. "If that's our only hope, then let's find it," he said. They traveled west along rugged trails, the ground occasionally shaking beneath them, the air growing thicker with ash. More than once, they hid from patrols of Valyrian soldiers who seemed to sense something amiss. Strange lights glowed in the clouds overhead, and in the distance, the silhouettes of dragons soared. Brandon's heart clenched each time, fearing discovery. They pressed on through the night. Just before dawn, Brandon felt a pull, a psychic tug leading him off the main path toward a rocky ravine. He and Baron climbed down carefully, battered by sulphurous gusts rising from vents in the earth. At the bottom, they followed a narrow passage until it opened into a hidden hollow. There, half buried in volcanic debris, stood a tree with bark as pale as bone and leaves the color of dried blood. It was not precisely a weirwood. Its trunk was slender and twisted, its bark marred by patches of black fungus, but the shape of its leaves was unmistakably reminiscent of the old gods. Brandon approached it with reverence. He laid a hand upon the trunk. The surface was warm, pulsing faintly, as though the tree were alive with a subterranean heartbeat. He dropped to his knees, ignoring the jagged stones digging into his legs. Closing his eyes, he reached out with his mind, seeking that space between waking and dream where the old god's voice echoed. Gradually, the noise of the outside world faded, Baron's breathing, the hiss of steam, the rumble of distant eruptions. Instead, Brandon heard a swirl of whispers like the rustle of leaves in a northern forest. He felt himself drifting across vast distances, pulled along by a silent wind. He emerged in a realm of swirling gray. Through the haze, he sensed another presence. A mind touched by Valyrian blood, trembling with a similar dread yet steeled by purpose. "Elena." He reached out, shaping silent words in the dream's pace. "It is time. Join me at Hell's Mouth. We must speak the final words at day's apex." He felt her acknowledgement, a wave of relief and terror all at once. Then the connection thinned, fleeting, and was gone like a candle flame snuffed out by wind. Brandon opened his eyes. Baron knelt beside him, face etched with worry. "Elena heard me," Brandon rasped, feeling drained. "We must go." They climbed out of the ravine and continued their journey, following the instructions they had shared beforehand. At midday, they reached the base of the largest volcanic crater in the region, a massive maw that spewed rolling clouds of thick smoke. The place was well named, Hell's Mouth. The land around it was scarred and broken, pocked by vents that belched scorching steam. Few ventured here willingly, but the chaos unfolding across the peninsula had drawn away most overseers and guards. Many were likely scrambling to understand the sudden unrest in the mines and mountains. They found a ledge that overlooked the crater, a vantage point from which the lava churned in a lake below, glowing fiercely. The heat was almost unbearable, the air choked with sulfur. They waited in anxious silence, scanning the horizon for any sign of Elena and Lucan. Time crawled. Brandon's heart hammered so loud it drowned out the distant rumbling. At length, two figures emerged from the haze, both covered in soot. Elena clutched a folded scrap of parchment. Lucan's face was streaked with ash. They hurried over, relief flashing in their eyes. Thank the gods, Lucan panted, voice muffled by his scarf. We completed the unbinding at the western ridges. The ground nearly swallowed us. We barely escaped. And now it's like the mountains are ready to blow. Elena nodded, her eyes aflame with grim resolve. She produced a Valyrian steel knife. Let's not waste another moment. They formed a circle at the crater's edge, each standing at a cardinal point, Brandon to the north, Elena to the south, Baron and Lucan to east and west. From the depths of the crater came a roar like some primeval beast stirring in its lair. Ash drifted around them and a fiery glow painted their faces. Brandon produced the final slip of parchment which bore the culminating lines of the incantation. Elena's voice cut through the haze. We speak these words in unison while I spill my blood. She sliced a shallow cut across her palm. Baron, Brandon, and Lucan followed suit, letting their own blood mingle with hers. Then they recited the words. Brandon could not understand them fully, they seemed to be in an amalgam of languages, some older than the Valyrian freehold itself. The chant rose above the roar of the volcano, each syllable resonating in the core of his being. He felt the presence of the old gods swirling around him, and for a moment it seemed he stood not on Valyria's cursed ground but beneath the weirwood in Winterfell, with the wind whispering across the snow. The final word hung in the air. The silence lasted a single heartbeat, 2, 3, then the world exploded. A tremor slammed through the ground, flinging them to their knees. Steam and ash erupted from the crater with a force that tore at the sky. The 14 flames roared as if awakened from a long slumber, and somewhere in the distance Brandon heard the resonant cry of a dragon, whether in fury or fear, he could not say. The land heaved violently and the circle of conspirators scrambled away from the edge, desperately clinging to the trembling ground. Go! Brandon shouted, though the words were lost in the cacophony. He and the others scrambled to find a path down the slope. The mountain convulsed, rifts opening and swallowing entire swaths of ground. Lava fountains spewed, lighting the darkening sky with lurid orange. A pyroclastic surge blasted overhead, searing the air. Brandon's cloak caught fire at the hem, but he beat it out frantically. He saw Baron almost slip into a fissure, but Lucan grabbed him at the last moment. The group stumbled, half-blind from the ash, choking on poisonous fumes. The heat was so intense Brandon felt his skin blistering. They pressed onward in a nightmarish scramble, guided only by the occasional glimpse of the sky and by the faint hope that the path to the harbor was still open. The entire peninsula was coming apart at the seams, a chain reaction of eruptions ripping the land asunder. Valyria would burn. Somehow, by sheer luck or the guiding hand of fate, they reached a vantage point that looked out over the plains below. What they saw stole their breath, towers crumbling in the distance, rivers of lava cutting across farmland and city streets, dragons wheeling madly in the sky, some falling in spirals as the earth's fury engulfed them. The air roiled with black clouds shot through with red lightning. A wave of molten rock coursed across the horizon, swallowing entire neighborhoods. It was a vision out of the worst nightmares made real. Brandon stared, tears gathering in his eyes. This was the doom, unstoppable now. Even if the 4 of them died here, the chain was set in motion. The old gods had demanded it and they had obeyed. Whatever horrors Valyria had been on the verge of unleashing would remain locked behind the veil. But at what cost? Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands would die in the scorching fires or choking ash. The greatest civilization in the known world, undone in a single cataclysmic day. A hand grasped his shoulder. It was Elena, face streaked with soot and tears. Her eyes searched his. Come on, she rasped, voice barely audible over the din, we need to live. To bear witness. He nodded numbly. They made their way toward the coast. The journey was harrowing beyond words, the ground lurched and fissures spat flame and toxic gas. Once they had to detour around a newly formed lava flow that cut off the valley route. The black, acrid air burned their lungs. Twice, dragons passed overhead, bellowing in rage and agony, scorching the land below as though lashing out at the very mountains that betrayed them. By dusk, if dusk it could be called in that hellish gloom, they reached the outskirts of a coastal settlement that was already half destroyed by an earthquake. Buildings lay in ruins, the screams of the injured echoing in the half-light. They stumbled onto a battered quay where smoke drifted across the water. Miraculously, a handful of ships remained afloat, their crews desperately preparing to flee. Brandon, Baron, Elena, and Lucan must have looked like specters of death as they approached. Some men shouted in High Valyrian, demanding payment or identity. Elena flashed a gold coin and invoked the Targaryen name, urging them to take them aboard. Though dazed and terrified, the crew complied, eager to leave the doomed land behind. They set sail into waters thick with ash. The waves were choked with debris and bodies. Behind them, the entire peninsula glowed red, a single inferno under a churning sky. Even at sea, the heat pressed against them and a rain of cinders fell like black snow. From the deck, Brandon turned to watch the last vestiges of Valyria collapse. Pillars of flame soared, mountains shattered. A monstrous cloud of ash billowed high into the atmosphere, turning day into night. He wondered how far the devastation would spread. Would it consume the entire peninsula, or just the heartland? Regardless, Valyria as it had been was no more. He saw Elena standing at the rail, face pale, hair matted with sweat. She looked ready to collapse. Guilt radiated from her posture. He stepped toward her, unsure what to say. Could any words mend the horror they had unleashed? She met his gaze, tears glinting in her violet eyes. "We've done a monstrous thing," she whispered. Brandon closed his eyes. In the silence of his mind, he felt the old gods stirring. He sensed a distant, ephemeral relief, their quiet acceptance tinged with sorrow. Yes, it was monstrous but necessary, like amputating a diseased limb to save the body. The realm was saved from the greater doom that would have come. This was the price. It was the only way, he murmured, placing a hand on hers. The old gods demanded it. She swallowed thickly. "I pray you are right, Brandon Stark. For all our sakes." In the days that followed, the ship sailed through treacherous waters. Thick ash clouds drifted across the sea, and many of the crew fell ill from breathing the poisonous air. Baron suffered a deep cough, while Lucan developed a fever that left him delirious. Yet they survived, eventually reaching a safer current that carried them west, away from the worst fallout. On the horizon behind them, the sky remained tinged with red for countless days, a dreadful reminder of what they had wrought. Word spread like wildfire across the narrow sea. The Valyrian freehold was destroyed in a single day of cataclysm. Many outlying colonies remained, but the core power, the ancient seat, was gone. The ruling families were presumed wiped out. Dragons had perished in droves. Merchant ships reported seas clogged with ash, and refugees swarmed in all directions. No one could fathom how or why such a catastrophe had happened. Some called it the wrath of the gods, others a freak convergence of volcanic activity. None suspected the secret band of conspirators who had lit the spark. When at last Brandon and his companions made landfall at Volantis, they found the city in chaos with rumors swirling. Soldiers locked down the harbor. Yet with caution and subterfuge, the group managed to slip away, forging a path northward through Essos. They traveled incognito, changed their attire, and avoided attention. Everywhere they went, talk of the doom dominated. Many predicted that the colonies and client states of Valyria would tear each other apart in the power vacuum. Some prophesied a new age of warlords. Others prayed some family of dragon lords had survived to bring order. Brandon said nothing. Elena parted ways with them near Pentos. She had decided to return to Dragonstone alone to share the truth with Enar in private. She feared that if House Targaryen's role in the Doom were ever discovered, it would mean their utter destruction. Brandon understood. They made plans to maintain coded correspondence through secret channels. There was no victory to celebrate, only a shared burden to carry. The Starks and Maester Lucan continued their journey north. Brandon felt the first hint of cold wind near the Bravos coast. And for once, he relished the chill. Every mile closer to Winterfell felt like a small piece of solace. He wondered how his father would greet him. Would Lord Jorah see him as a hero or a monster? Perhaps neither. Perhaps both. Brandon wondered the same about himself. At the crossing of the neck, the temperature plunged, as if the land sensed the approach of winter. But the air smelled cleaner, the sky clearer. In his dreams, the old gods no longer whispered of doom. Instead, he saw fleeting glimpses of something else. White figures in a land of eternal snow, stirring restlessly. The threat was not gone, only delayed. The world remained as dangerous as ever. But at least Valyria would not add its unstoppable might to that darkness. Perhaps the realm stood a better chance now. When Winterfell's stout walls finally rose before them, Brandon felt tears sting his eyes. The gates opened, and a handful of guards rushed out to greet them, calling his name. The courtyard was awash in torchlight, and from within, Lord Jorah emerged, face etched with shock and relief. Brandon slid from his horse, nearly collapsing, and his father caught him in an embrace. In the days that followed, Brandon recounted his tale to Lord Jorah in private. His father listened gravely. He did not rail or condemn. He only held Brandon's hand, seeing the torment etched into his son's face. When Brandon was done, Lord Jorah said, The old gods gave you a heavy burden, one I pray no man should bear again. But if it was necessary to protect the world from a greater horror, then we must trust in their wisdom. He paused, searching Brandon's eyes. And in yours. Brandon swallowed hard, haunted by the screams he had heard in his visions. Father, what if we've only paved the way for another horror yet to come? The old gods showed me the threat in the north. The White Walkers. I fear we're not free of danger. Lord Yora nodded grimly. Then we must remain vigilant. House Stark has always remembered. Now we have something else to remember as well. In the weeks that followed, the North learned the bare bones of the Southern rumor. Valyria had fallen to a great disaster. Few details reached Winterfell. It was a far-off tragedy. Yet Brandon carried the knowledge in his heart. He and his companions had sparked that conflagration, fulfilling the old god's prophecy. He felt the weight of guilt, tempered only by the conviction that something worse had been averted. Occasionally, ravens arrived from Dragonstone with coded messages from Alina, confirming that the Targaryens grieved for Valyria, but intended to keep their role a secret from all but a handful they trusted. Some lines in her letters hinted at new dreams, foretellings of shifting powers in the free cities, of mortal wars to come. But there was no mention of a threat from the north. Perhaps the Targaryens were turned forever south and east, or perhaps they placed their faith in Brandon and his house to guard against whatever might stir in the polar night. On a chilly evening months later, Brandon stood once more in the godwood of Winterfell, beneath the red leaves of the weirwood. His breath rose in silver plumes, dissolving in the moonlight. The carved face regarded him silently. He pressed a hand to the trunk, recalling the day he had first felt the old gods calling him. How many lives were lost? He asked in a whisper that was half a prayer, half an accusation. Was there truly no other way? The weirwood did not answer, but the wind picked up, carrying a distant sob that might have been the lament of ghosts or the creak of snow-laden branches. Brandon closed his eyes and let out a trembling breath. He saw once again the visions that had haunted him, a vast horde of undead, the realm blanketed in eternal ice, the living overrun. If Valyria had stood at the height of its power, unopposed, forging new weapons and magics, perhaps they would have eventually rivaled the threat from the north or unleashed something else monstrous, a second long night. There was no certain path except the one the old gods had shown him. He drew his cloak tighter and bowed his head in silent supplication. In that moment, he felt the presence of ancient watchers, as if all the spirits of House Stark gone before observed him. He offered a quiet vow: I shall live to protect the realm from what comes. And I shall carry this guilt until my last breath, so that no one else must share it. A hush fell. The Hearttree's face was inscrutable, but Brandon sensed neither condemnation nor absolution, only a solemn acknowledgement. In the days, months, and years thereafter, Brandon Stark went about his duties as a son of Winterfell, eventually inheriting the mantle of lordship when age and time demanded it. Tales of the doom of Valyria spread across the known world, and in Westeros the cataclysm became legend, the fall of the greatest empire the world had ever seen. People spoke of the curse of the gods, or perhaps the collapse of Valyrian sorcery. No one knew the truth, that a Stark prophecy had lit the spark that devoured an empire. In time, other matters took prominence: the rise of new powers, the forging of alliances, the petty squabbles of southern kings. Winter came and went as it always did. But a shadow still lay upon the north, a reminder of the ancient threat that slept beyond the wall. Brandon sometimes dreamed of pale figures moving in the darkness, heard the faint crackle of ice underfoot. And always, the old gods reminded him, the realm was spared one doom, but the final battle might yet lie ahead. He stood ready, or as ready as any mortal could be. He had learned, in the most painful way imaginable, that the demands of prophecy required terrible sacrifice. He had been the instrument of the old god's will, forging a cataclysm that tore the world's mightiest city from the map. Could he be called a hero? Or was he merely the hand that guided the blade? Perhaps in the end it did not matter. The cost had been incalculable, the guilt indelible. Yet the world still turned and the darkness in the far north still slumbered, for now. Sometimes, on quiet nights, Brandon would gaze into the hearth's flames and imagine the lost brilliance of Valyria, the towers, the dragons, the wonders that would never again grace the earth. He would feel a pang of sorrow so deep it nearly crushed him. And he would think, if there was truly no other way, then the old gods alone must shoulder this blame. But then he remembered the weight of his dagger, the smell of sulfur, and the endless screams that had haunted his nightmares. The old gods had only guided him. The choice, in the end, had been his, and he had chosen to save the realm from a fate unseen. In time, a hush settled over the shattered lands of Valyria, and ash-choked ruin where few dared to tread. Rumors spoke of fires that still burned beneath the surface, strange beasts prowling the blackened crags, cursed seas that devoured ships. The free cities warred over the scraps, forging new alliances and rivalries. House Targaryen, secure on Dragonstone, kept a low profile, nursing their dragons and their secrets, biding their time until destiny called them forth again. Brandon Stark, meanwhile, kept vigil in the north. When his father passed, he became the Lord of Winterfell, sworn guardian of the region's ancient traditions. In his twilight years, he would sometimes wander alone into the Godwood, leaning on a staff, his gray hair stirring in the cold breeze. He would stand beneath the heart tree for hours, communing with silent watchers. None knew his thoughts, for he seldom spoke of Valyria's doom anymore. But those who glimpsed his face at such moments saw a sorrow beyond words, and in his eyes a flicker of distant fire. He died in his bed at a ripe age, surrounded by kin. Snow fell thick that day, and the wind seemed to sigh across the battlements. They laid him to rest in the crypts of Winterfell, where the kings in the north and lords of the north slept for centuries. Some whispered that the statue carved in his likeness bore an unusually somber expression, as though the stone itself grieved. But no one fully understood the cause. The truth of Brandon's burden faded into half-forgotten legend, overshadowed by new wars and new heroes. Yet the old gods remembered, as did the survivors of House Targaryen who guarded their knowledge with whispered care. Years later, as new generations rose to claim the stage, as Targaryens stirred in the south and the lines of Stark endured in the north, the legacy of the Doom remained a haunting testament to the power of prophecy and the cost of heeding it. Perhaps, in some hidden corner of the afterlife, Brandon Stark's spirit stood watch alongside the old gods and the silent hearts of his ancestors, forever bearing witness to that day of wrath when the world shook, Valyria burned, and an unseen threat was delayed, if not destroyed. And so the realm carried on, ignorant of the debt it owed to a lonely Stark prophecy that had birthed a monstrous salvation. Those who survived would never know the name of the man who had damned an empire to save a world. And if the cold winds ever rose again, if the enemy in the far north ever returned, perhaps the realm would once more need a Stark dreamer to stand between life and death, forging the fate of Westeros in the crucible of choice. For prophecy was a blade without a hilt, and the old gods were silent, but ever watching. Lord Brandon Stark died in his bed at the age of 59, surrounded by kin, the secret of the Doom still heavy on his heart. Most in Winterfell believed his latter years had been marked by that peculiar solemnity that follows men who have borne unspeakable burdens. Few guessed that those burdens had encompassed an entire civilization's demise. But he took that knowledge with him into the crypts, entombed beneath the gray granite of the north, where the faces of ancient kings kept their silent watch in the dark. The new Lord of Winterfell, Cregan Stark, Brandon's eldest son, stood in the Godwood the morning after his father's funeral. Snow fell in gentle flurries, dusting the statues, the bare branches, and the frozen earth. Cregan placed a hand upon the weirwood trunk just as his father once had, seeking comfort or answers. He felt only the faint pulse of an ancient presence. Yet that morning it offered no visions, no whispers, only a somber hush, as if all the old gods were in mourning for the man who had served them so faithfully. In truth, Cregan knew almost nothing of his father's role in the fall of Valyria, only that Brandon had once traveled far from the north on some secret errand, returning weary and changed. Cregan also knew that House Targaryen, which quietly maintained distant contact with Winterfell through sporadic ravens, seemed to regard Brandon Stark with a deep, unspoken respect. More than once over the years, a sealed letter had arrived from Dragonstone, addressed to Brandon alone. He had always read such missives in private, afterwards burning them in the Godswood's brazier. Now Brandon was gone. The hush left behind weighed on Cregan's chest. He felt an unsettling intuition that something had been left incomplete, or that the quiet might presage a new and greater storm. Still, he was no dreamer as his father had been. He had neither the reverence nor the dread for glimpses of prophecy. He knew only that, from this day forward, he must bear House Stark's mantle and defend the north through all hardships. When the funeral rites concluded and the last of the well-wishers departed, the new lord called his closest advisors, his brother, Gon, and Maester Roderick, into a private solar. There he laid out the tasks of the coming winter. Food stores needed to be tallied, the watch on the wall might require fresh rangers, and certain bannermen had grown lax in paying taxes. Mundane matters, all of them, but pressing. It was Gon, ever the brash one, who raised a more intriguing question. "Brother, I keep thinking of what father said near the end when he was feverish. He kept muttering about fire and ice, about a darkness beyond the horizon. Did he pass that knowledge on to you? Cregan looked up from the ledger he was examining. No. He said only that I must always guard the north and remember that dangers do not always come with open banners and marching armies. He said some come in silence or disguised as hope. That was all. Gon leaned forward. Yet the Targaryens regard our house with more than the usual courtesy. I recall father once telling me that. Could it be they share some secret with us? Maester Roderick cleared his throat. Might I speak plainly, my lord? Cregan nodded. Always. The Targaryens escaped Valyria before the Doom and settled on Dragonstone. It is a matter of history that they left Valyria under the guidance of Daenerys the Dreamer, foreseeing a great disaster. But there are rumors, wild stories, that some in Westeros had a hand in what befell the freehold. Superstition, no doubt, but the fact that House Targaryen keeps to Dragonstone, neither venturing forth nor losing their hold, may hint at knowledge few possess. Perhaps your father had some part in that knowledge. If so, he took it to his grave. Cregan regarded the maester. He sensed an unspoken question in the old man's eyes, whether Brandon had, in fact, carried deeper secrets. The new lord shook his head. If so, it's done. Now we must look to the future. Our house remains strong, but storms brew in the south. I've had word that King Arlen of the Durrandon line is rallying forces near Blackwater Bay. Some talk of a move against the Riverlands. A southern war, Gon grunted. It never ends. Cregan sighed. It could remain a feud of the Stormlands unless it pulls in the Reach or the Vale. Still, we Starks watch from afar. Let the South break itself on its own swords if it must. Our concern is the Wall, the Wildlings, and the promise that winter is on its way. Maester Roderick nodded. Well spoken, my lord. They shifted to discussing more practical affairs. Over the next few moons, winter's approach forced the North to focus on storing grain, mending holdfasts, and ensuring the safety of distant settlements. Cregan, though young, proved a capable lord, steady, fair-minded, with a tolerance for hearing counsel before making decisions. Some said he lacked the iron spirit of the previous generation, but others praised his sensible nature. He did not dwell on the question of his father's secrets until a freezing night when a raven arrived from Dragonstone. The bird's missive was sealed with the three-headed dragon crest in black wax. Cregan opened it at once, alone in his solar. The letter was short, written in High Valyrian script, which he could puzzle out only with difficulty thanks to his maester's lessons. It read, To the son of Brandon Stark, who once carried a burden beyond measure, we grieve for his passing. Know that the bond our houses share remains. A new dream troubles us. The singing flame stirs once more. We must speak soon. Elena Targaryen. Cregan frowned at those cryptic words. Singing flame? His father had never spoken of that phrase. Yet he recalled that Elena Targaryen had been mentioned rarely in Brandon's presence, though never with detail. With the letter in hand, he sought Maester Roderick's expertise. The old man read it, eyebrows knitting in perplexity. It references a dream, said Roderick. We know House Targaryen values prophetic dreams. The phrase singing flame could be a metaphor or a reference to some lost lore from Valyria. Do they intend to summon me to Dragonstone? Cregan asked, uneasy. Quite possibly. Or they might simply warn you of something stirring in Essos or perhaps near the volcanic lands that remain. There are rumors that the Valyrian peninsula still suffers smoldering fires, unnatural storms, and twisted creatures. Cregan rubbed his brow. Well, the Targaryens aren't the only dreamers in this world. The Rhoynar had their own seers once, if stories can be believed. Yet why involve House Stark now? Roderick ventured carefully. Your father's connection to them may have been deeper than we realize. They might assume you've inherited his gifts, or at least his willingness to act. But you've said yourself your father left you no instructions. He did not. Cregan gazed at the candle flame flickering on the table, wondering if it sang in some sense he could not discern. They ask we speak soon. Maybe they wish me to come in person. That's impractical with winter nigh, but ignoring their message might be unwise. Indeed, the maester agreed. Dragonstone wields dragons, perhaps fewer than in Valyria's heyday, but enough to matter. House Targaryen's favor should not be taken lightly. I suggest you dispatch a reply at once. Clarify your father's death, express your condolences, and invite any Targaryen envoy here if they wish to speak face to face. Cregan nodded. A raven is safer and quicker than a journey over land and sea. Let us do so. So he composed a polite response, explaining that Brandon Stark had passed without leaving detailed knowledge of any new prophecy and offering to receive a Targaryen emissary in Winterfell if such discussion was urgent. He sealed it with House Stark's direwolf sigil. Within days, the raven was gone, winging its way south and east into the snowy gloom. Weeks passed in quiet routine. Snow thickened. The long lake froze over, and the cold seeped into every stone of Winterfell except for those above the hot springs. Cregan oversaw the distribution of food, the patrolling of roads, and the old custom of welcoming small folk to shelter behind castle walls in the worst of the freeze. The letter from Dragonstone began to feel like a distant dream. Then, in the depth of midwinter, another raven arrived. The Targaryens accepted his invitation. Indeed, Lady Elena Targaryen herself was sailing north with a small retinue. She planned to land at White Harbor and journey overland to Winterfell, braving the cold. Cregan felt a flare of anxiety. Why would a lady of Dragonstone undertake such an arduous trip in the heart of winter? His brother Gon shrugged when told. They're dragon lords, are they not? Perhaps they think themselves immune to cold. I doubt they'll ride a dragon so far, Cregan mused. That's seldom seen. More likely it's a diplomatic mission. But for what purpose? Gon only smirked. We'll see soon enough. They made what arrangements they could, ensuring the King's Road between White Harbor and Winterfell was cleared of heavy snowdrifts, dispatching men to scout for bandits or wolves. And after nearly a moon's turn, word came that Lady Elena's party was nearing the castle, having traveled slowly but steadily. In the frosty dawn, Cregan stood atop the inner gatehouse, wrapped in thick furs, scanning the pale horizon. Snow-laden clouds hovered overhead, and the bare branches of Winterfell's courtyard trees bristled in the wind. At last, he glimpsed a column of riders in the distance, cloaks of black and red distinct against the white landscape. He descended to the courtyard, flanked by guards, to greet them at the gate. When the visitors entered, they were fewer than expected, only about a dozen, most on sturdy mountain-bred horses. At their head rode a woman with silver-gold hair bound in a thick braid, face flushed from the cold, eyes of pale violet. She wore a dark cloak emblazoned with the Targaryen dragon in subtle thread, and her posture exuded both dignity and a quiet gravity. Beside her rode two men, one obviously a knight, the other perhaps a steward or advisor. Both seemed travel-worn but alert. Cregan stepped forward. Lady Elena Targaryen, be welcome at Winterfell. I am Cregan Stark, son of the late Lord Brandon. She dismounted gracefully, though the stiffness in her limbs betrayed the strain of travel. Lord Cregan, my condolences on your father's passing. He was an exceptional man, and I grieve that I did not come sooner. Her voice carried a certain resonance, as though each word had been measured before speaking. Cregan bowed his head in thanks and introduced Gon. Then he directed them all indoors, away from the biting wind. Servants appeared, whisking the Targaryen party toward a warm hall where hot mulled wine and thick stews awaited. Winterfell's hospitality might not rival the grandeur of southern courts, but the food was hearty, and the hearth's glow was a blessing after the freezing ride. As they settled at a long table near a roaring fire, Elena studied the walls and tapestries. Cregan noted the faint sorrow in her expression, as if returning to a place laden with old memories. He found himself thinking, she must have been here before. Indeed, from her letters it was implied she had known Brandon personally. Why had father never spoken of it? When they had eaten enough to remove the edge of hunger, Cregan gestured for privacy. A pair of Stark guards, along with Elena's knight, stood discreetly at the periphery. Gon remained as well, but the servants retreated. Only then did Lady Elena speak in a lower tone, eyes lingering on Cregan's face. Your father and I shared a secret, she began. A bond forged long ago. It pains me that I can no longer speak with him. But perhaps you deserve to know at least a part of what he carried. Cregan drew a breath, sensing a tremor of anticipation from Gon. My lady, I've often wondered. Father kept much from us, though I suspect it concerned the fall of Valyria. She leaned back, eyes reflecting the firelight. You speak boldly. Are you suggesting House Stark had knowledge of that disaster? The doom of Valyria is a mystery the world still puzzles over. I do not speak to rumor or speculation, but my father, he was different after returning from that journey in his youth. And I have read the old ravens from your house enough to guess you were deeply connected. Elena exhaled slowly. Aye, so it was. I shall not speak all details, for some secrets are best kept. But know this, Brandon Stark was essential in preventing a far greater calamity than the doom itself. He believed that if Valyria endured, it would unleash horrors that would imperil all the world. Thus, in desperation, we, my house and he, ensured the doom came to pass. Sooner and more destructively than it might have otherwise. Cregan's mind reeled. Though he had expected some revelation, hearing it plainly stated was a blow. You caused it? Deliberately. She hesitated. We lit the spark. The 14 flames were already volatile. Brandon carried an urgent prophecy, and without him, none of it would have been possible. Targaryen knowledge of Valyrian sorcery played a part, but it was your father's unwavering resolve born of his ties to these old gods of the north that sealed the fate of the freehold. Gawain let out a low whistle, eyes wide. Cregan felt cold to his core despite the blazing hearth. Tens of thousands died, he murmured. Elena's face creased in sorrow. Hundreds of thousands, likely. We all carry the guilt. But your father believed, and so did I, that it was the only way to avert an apocalypse that might have consumed all life. I cannot speak to the fullness of that prophecy, but he was convinced Valyria was on the brink of summoning or creating a darkness beyond mortal imagining. The old gods commanded him to stop it. And so he did. Cregan felt as though he were hearing a nightmare retold only to discover it was real. He thought of the father he had known, stern, dutiful, often distant. He remembered glimpses of haunting sadness in Brandon's eyes. Gods, he muttered. He did speak of that guilt in his last days, though he gave me no details. Now I see why. Elena's gaze flicked to the weirwood-carved pillars of the hall. He carried that weight until his final breath. But the realm was spared the doom of the long night, or so he believed. The question now arises, has the threat truly been averted, or only delayed? That question hung in the warm air. Cregan rubbed his beard, a gesture of uncertainty. What do you mean? Her violet eyes seemed to peer into distant realms. We Targaryens still experience prophetic dreams. Lately, I have dreamt of shadows in the far north amid howling winds and dead eyes gleaming blue. My father and mother dreamt of it before me, as did Daenerys the dreamer in ages past, an other threat, a second long night. This is what Brandon feared Valyria might exacerbate or unleash. For a time, we thought the destruction of the freehold ended the immediate peril. But now I see darkness stirs again. And I've come here to see if House Stark has gleaned any fresh sign. Cregan swallowed. My father, on his deathbed, spoke of nightmares. He did not name the others, but I recall something about an icy legion, about the breathing of corpses. I dismissed it as fever talk. Now you say it may be real? Elena inclined her head. We cannot know how soon or in what form such darkness might come. But it's enough that we sense it. The question is, what can we do to prepare? The southern realms dismiss these old tales. We Targaryens keep to Dragonstone, watching. House Stark guards the north. If we do not watch carefully, the realm might be caught unawares. Gawain stirred. What exactly are these others? Do you Targaryens know more than our own legends? We've all heard nursery stories of white shadows beyond the wall and the last hero who fought them. Elena pressed her lips together. Only fragments gleaned from old Valyrian texts. There was an account of some ancient conflict, ice wraiths or white walkers, unstoppable by conventional arms. The Valyrian scribes dismissed it as savage superstition, but one scribe wrote that these creatures were as real as dragons, only dormant. The account claimed they retreated after the Dawn Age, possibly sealed by wards the children of the forest wove into the far north. That was all. Cregan felt a deep unease. We do not see them. If anything, the wildlings beyond the wall remain our chief worry. Even they speak of ancient terrors in the frozen wastes, but their talk is less than reliable. Elena's expression hardened with resolution. So you have nothing concrete? No sign the wards are failing? No, my lady, said Cregan. Yet winter is here, and it's a harsh one. I'll dispatch more rangers to the far north. See if they report anything unusual. She nodded, relief tempered by caution. I appreciate it. Be assured, if any threat arises, House Targaryen will fly to your side. I came not to sow panic but to reaffirm our bond. In your father's name. A silence fell, broken only by the pop of the fire. At length, Cregan mustered a question that weighed on him. Why tell me of my father's role in Valyria now? You could have kept it hidden forever. Elena regarded him gently. Because if your father's prophecy was true once, it can be true again. House Stark is tied to the old gods in ways that defy comprehension. If dark forces stir anew, you may dream as he did, or your children might. We Targaryens see flickers of the future through dragon dreams, but the old gods speak through the weirwoods. Our two lines once cooperated in secret to save the world from a conflagration of ice and fire. We may need such cooperation again. That statement sent chills along Cregan's spine. You speak as if House Stark will hold the fate of the realm in its hands once more. Elena's eyes glinted. Fate is rarely so straightforward. But yes, from everything we know, the others, if they return, will come from the far north. Your watch is the first line of defense. In the days of the long night, the first men and the children of the forest joined forces. Now we Targaryens stand ready to aid if the need arises. She paused. And that is partly why I made this journey. To ensure you and I understand each other. Gon, usually quick to crack a jest, remained uncharacteristically solemn. This is a great deal to take in, my lady. Elena offered a sad smile. Indeed, but rest assured, we do not intend to remain in Winterfell long. I know the hardships your people face in winter, and my presence is a burden on your stores. I'll soon depart, but let us confirm a line of communication. If you see or sense anything unnatural, you must let us know at once. Cregan nodded, though inwardly he felt a swirl of conflicting emotions. Awe at the magnitude of what his father had done, horror at the cost, lingering disbelief at talk of others. But he too had grown up on those legends. The North remembered even if the rest of the realm forgot. That evening they held a small feast in honor of their guest. The fare was simple, mostly venison stew, black bread, and thick ale, but Elena accepted it graciously. She was no prancing southerner. Despite the fine clothes, she ate with quiet dignity, listening to the Starks talk of the cold, the wolves, and the hardships of the north. After the meal, as folk drifted away to find warmth or rest, Elena asked to visit the crypts. Cregan and Gon exchanged looks. The crypts of Winterfell were hallowed ground where the old kings and lords of the north lay with stone dire wolves at their feet. The Targaryen lady's request was unusual, but Cregan could guess her reason. She wished to pay respects to Brandon Stark, who lay entombed among his ancestors. And so, with torches and heavy cloaks, they descended the winding steps into the darkness beneath the castle. The tunnels were chilly, the air still and grave. The rows of stone figures stretched away into the gloom, ancient monarchs with iron swords laid across their laps. Cregan guided her to the more recent tombs where his father's statue stood. Brandon Stark had been carved with a solemn face, a curved sword at his side, a dire wolf couchant at his feet. The stonemason had captured something intangible in the features, an undercurrent of sorrow that set him apart from the other stoic visages. Elena approached slowly, her torch casting shifting shadows on the walls. She stared at Brandon's likeness in silence, then knelt. You carried a burden none should bear, she whispered. I pray you are at peace, Brandon. Cregan felt a lump in his throat. Seeing her grief made him realize how deeply his father had impacted those beyond the north, forging ties he himself had never fully understood. After a long pause, Elena rose, turning to him. Though I have regrets, I do not regret meeting him, nor do I regret what we accomplished, she said. He saved us from a terrible fate, even if the price was beyond measure. Cregan bowed his head. He would have found comfort in your words. I only wish I could have asked him more while he lived. She glanced at the stony faces of the older Starks. Brandon believed in what he did, despite the horror. Let that guide you if the day comes when dark choices loom again. He swallowed. I will remember. They departed the crypts, and the next day, Elena indeed made ready to leave. Her party had urgent business back on Dragonstone, so she claimed. Cregan provided new mounts and provisions, and they parted ways with a mutual vow that if either house sensed an ancient threat stirring, they would send word immediately. After the Targaryens rode out, Gon found his brother near the castle ramparts, gazing at the snow-swept wilderness. You look troubled, Gon observed. Cregan let out a breath, watching it curl into the icy air. I am. Everything father did. It changes how I see him. He was a good man, a stern man, but to know he helped destroy Valyria so utterly. Gods. I can't even fathom the scale. Gon nodded. Me neither. But I wonder if that knowledge would do us any good now. The deed is done. The Targaryen lady warns of a new menace. Maybe the old menace. The White Walkers. Should we just carry on as usual? Or begin preparing? Cregan's lips thinned. Prepare how? We cannot raise an army in the dead of winter on the basis of old tales. Our people would starve. And there's been no sign from the wall of anything amiss. Let us remain watchful, yes. Bolster the night's watch with supplies if we can spare them. But otherwise we can only wait. Gon clapped a hand on Cregan's shoulder. Spoken like a true Stark. Father would approve. Yet as the winter deepened, Cregan found it impossible to fully forget that conversation. In quiet moments, he would recall Lady Elena's haunted expression, or her talk of shadows with blue eyes. Sometimes he paced the battlements at dusk, scanning the white expanse for any trace of movement. knowing full well that if the others came, the first to face them would be the men on the wall, leagues to the north. He began sending more frequent missives to Castle Black, inquiring about conditions beyond the wall. The replies were routine. A few wildling raids, sightings of polar bears, rumors of a self-styled raider king. No mention of strange corpses or walking wraiths. Cregan breathed easier. Perhaps the doom had truly been averted. Perhaps centuries would pass before any new threat stirred. That was how the next year unfolded. Slow, cold, with the north turned inward, grappling with winter's bite. Come spring's first thaw, travelers brought news from the south of petty conflicts. King Arlen of the Stormlands had clashed with petty lords in the Reach, the Ironborn had raided the western coast, the Vale was dealing with mountain clan uprisings. Ordinary chaos, no. Thing new. Meanwhile, the Targaryens stayed quiet on Dragonstone. Elena's letter came only once more, several moons after her visit, stating that her dreams had quieted somewhat. She invited Cregan to keep faith and not trouble himself unnecessarily. That letter relieved him. Perhaps the realm would enjoy a respite from greater perils. He turned his focus to forging stronger ties among the northern houses, ensuring that House Stark remained stable. The Karstarks, the Manderleys, the Glovers each had their own local concerns. He negotiated a small trade deal with White Harbor's merchants for salt fish and grains, oversaw repairs on Moat Cailin, and visited the lumber camps near the Wolfswood. None of it possessed the grandeur of toppling empires or saving the world, but it was vital for the North's well-being. Seasons turned again. The snows receded and fresh green spread across the fields. In time, Cregan took a wife from House Serwyn. Her name was Alyssa, a bright-eyed woman with a practical mind more than suited to the daily rigors of northern life. She brought a softening presence to Winterfell, arranging small gatherings, doting on the children of the fortress's households, and occasionally convincing Cregan to put aside his burdens for a rare moment of laughter. Any mention of the doom or the others faded into a distant undercurrent of memory overshadowed by the cycles of everyday life. But in the quiet corners of his mind, Cregan wondered if destiny would truly let the matter rest forever. Some nights, as he lay awake, he felt a stirring in the back of his thoughts, like an echo of his father's lost prophecies. He pushed such notions away and closed his eyes, trying to find sleep. Years passed. House Stark prospered. A son was born to Cregan and Alyssa named Torrin after an ancient king in the north. The realm at large experienced no cataclysms, only the usual strife of lords bickering over borders and taxes. Far to the south, the Storm Kings and the Reach Lords clashed sporadically, but no grand conquest threatened the north. Cregan's brother Gawain wed a daughter of House Mormont, forging an alliance that secured Bear Island's loyalty. Indeed, everything suggested a period of relative calm. Then came a letter from the Night's Watch, a request for more supplies as an unusually large number of wildlings had been sighted gathering near the Frostfangs. The Watch feared a major incursion. Cregan read the Raven's note in the Great Hall, tapping his fingers against the table. Wildlings often tested the wall, but large gatherings could be dangerous. That alone did not terrify him, but the note included a curious addendum from the Lord Commander, who reported strange tales told by captured wildlings. They speak of a shadowy presence deeper in the lands of Always Winter, the note read. They say their manse, or their champion, or some prophet of theirs has claimed to see pale figures that do not speak. The wildlings seem spooked, as though fleeing something. We see no proof of whites or others, but their fear is real. We request more men and resources to fortify Eastwatch and the Shadow Tower in case they attempt to go around the wall by sea or over the mountains. Cregan's mind snapped back to the old warnings. He summoned Gawain immediately, as well as Maester Roderick. The Watch begs for aid, he said, showing them the missive. Wildlings in large numbers, fleeing some rumored terror. Gawain whistled softly, reading the lines. A shadowy presence with pale figures. That's uncomfortably close to the old tales. Roderick frowned. We have no confirmation. Might be superstition. Wildlings spin tales to sow panic. Or it might be real, Cregan muttered, old dread flaring. We cannot ignore it. The Watch seldom begs for help without cause. Let us raise a modest force from our bannermen to reinforce Castle Black. We can't send an entire army, but enough to show we take their alarm seriously. Both men agreed. Orders went out, ravens dispatched. Within a fortnight, 100 seasoned men from Winterfell, plus contingents from Carhold and the Dreadfort, gathered to march north along the King's Road. Gawain led them with the vigor of a man half in love with adventure, though he was now in his 30s. Cregan, as Lord of Winterfell, remained behind to oversee the broader region. Yet he resolved to stay alert for news from the Wall. That news came faster than expected. As Gawain's force neared the last river, they met a band of ragged wildlings who had somehow slipped past the Night's Watch. These free folk did not charge or kill on sight. Instead, they surrendered to Gawain's outriders, exhausted and half-frozen. They spoke of entire villages deserted, a great fear driving them south. One older woman insisted she had seen white shadows prowling the edges of the forest at twilight, their eyes glowing like pale stars. Another youth insisted the ground itself froze solid beneath them, so cold it burned the flesh. The descriptions made Gawain's blood run cold. He pressed them for details, but they babbled of children stolen in the night, of walking corpses that crunched over snow, of eerie winds that whispered death. Some claimed it was only rumor, but the stark terror in their eyes betrayed genuine fear. Gawain wrote all of this in a hasty letter to Cregan, urging him to prepare for the worst. Cregan read his brother's message by torchlight. Though still uncertain, his heart hammered. Could the others truly be stirring? Or was it mass hysteria among the wildlings? But if the free folk were migrating en masse, seeking refuge beyond the Wall, that alone would be a major crisis. The Watch could be overwhelmed. Even if the tales of walking white shadows were exaggerated, thousands of desperate wildlings posed a threat. Without waiting for further proof, he assembled more men. Winterfell could not stand idle, not with the possibility that his father's darkest fears were coming to fruition. Over the next few weeks, a larger host was mustered, near 1,000 strong, from various northern houses. Some lords bristled at the call to arms for the sake of rumors, but Cregan invoked ancient duty. The Night's Watch defends us all, he reminded them. If they send for aid, we answer. He also sent a cautious raven to Dragonstone, directed to Lady Olenna, reminding her of her vow to support the North if unnatural threats arose. But the response might take weeks. The distance was great, and who knew how quickly the Targaryens could act. At last, the northern host marched. Cregan himself rode at its head. Alyssa, his wife, insisted on remaining behind to protect Winterfell should anything else befall them. Their young son, Torrin, clutched her skirts, too small to understand his father's stern farewell. Cregan kissed them both and promised to return. Then he set out, passing beneath Winterfell's gatehouse as the wind carried flurries across the courtyard. The journey to Castle Black was punishing. Snow drifts rose high, the roads slick with ice. Many men had to wear thick fur boots and layered cloaks. Provisions ran low, so they hunted game along the way. Some nights, the cold was so fierce that men huddled close in tents, cursing the rumors that had drawn them out in such conditions. But Cregan pressed on. The memory of Olenna Targaryen's warning spurred him, as did the echo of his father's final words. He would not be found wanting if the realm's oldest enemies awoke in the darkness. They reached the Wall, a colossal stretch of ice shining in the weak winter sun. It towered above them, imposing and silent, the living testament to ancient wars. The gates opened, revealing Castle Black's courtyard bustling with rangers, stewards, and builders. Gawain was there, greeting his brother with a grim salute. Word traveled quickly that a large host from House Stark had arrived. The Lord Commander, a grizzled man named Ethan Snow, a bastard branch of House Umber, convened a gathering in the common hall. There, by the flickering light of braziers, he laid out the situation. We've had more wildlings crossing in the last 2 moons than we've seen in a decade. They're half-starved, half-crazed with fear. Our scouts confirm large encampments scattered across the haunted forest. Rumors say a wildling leader named Harrick the Crow is trying to unite them. He claims that an army of the dead stalks the far north. We've seen no direct evidence, no whites, no others, but the stories are consistent. We need more men to secure the castles along the Wall. If they all rush south, we'll be overrun. Cregan nodded. You have them, Lord Commander. But if the wildlings are truly fleeing some evil, might it find its way here eventually? That is our fear, Ethan said, voice rough. We have double patrols, but the northern wastes are vast. If this is real, we may not see it until it's nearly upon us. They discussed strategies for days. The Stark forces divided among Castle Black, Eastwatch by the Sea, and the Shadow Tower, reinforcing the undermanned Night's Watch. The idea was to be ready if a massive horde of wildlings launched an assault, or if something worse followed behind them. Meanwhile, Rangers ventured beyond the wall to gather intelligence. Time wore on. Minor skirmishes flared, wildling scouts testing the defenses, small raids for food, but no great confrontation. Some men began to grumble that they were chasing ghosts. But then a patrol failed to return. It consisted of 8 men led by a ranger named Jother Marsh, a veteran of the watch. They had gone into the haunted forest to seek Harik the Crow for negotiations. Days later, no sign of them. Another group found only their horses, riderless, alive but spooked. A hush settled over Castle Black when news arrived. Gawain gazed at Cregan, anxiety plain on his face. This is how the stories begin, brother, he muttered. Patrols vanish. Frozen corpses found with empty eyes. Cregan suppressed a shudder. We must find out what happened. I'll lead a search party. We can't let fear rule us. So they mustered 40 men, rangers of the watch, plus a contingent of Stark's best hunters. They set out at dawn, heading through the great gate in the wall, stepping into the cold wilderness beyond. The haunted forest lived up to its name, gnarled trees heavy with frost, drifts of snow that sometimes reached a rider's thigh, and an oppressive silence that made every crunch of boots echo like a shout. They followed the tracks left by Marsh's patrol, though snow had partially covered them. The search party moved slowly, scanning every shadow. After 2 days, they found signs of a skirmish, broken branches, footprints that doubled back and forth, a patch of ground stained darker than the surrounding snow. A piece of black cloak snagged on a tree trunk. But no bodies. Men exchanged uneasy glances, recalling the legends of the others taking corpses away to do their vile magic. Cregan forced them onward, though a chill of dread gnawed at him. Night fell early, and they made camp in a hollow, setting sentries around a large fire. The wind moaned in the trees. Some men insisted they heard voices in the gusts. Cregan tried to quiet such talk, but even he had trouble sleeping. On the 3rd day, they pressed deeper into the forest. That afternoon, beneath a sky of leaden clouds, the lead scout signaled for the group to halt. Cregan rode forward and saw what had spooked the scout, footprints half buried in fresh snow. Not the usual shape left by boots, though. The men bent closer, brushing aside the powder. The prints were long, narrow, almost clawed, unlike anything they recognized. Or, if the old stories were true, the footprints of something inhuman. A hush fell as they peered at the tracks. They went on for a stretch, then vanished abruptly where the snow was blown away by wind. Gawain muttered, might be an animal. A big wolf or a cat. A younger ranger murmured, no. I've seen direwolf prints. This is different. They followed the tracks as best they could until they lost them. Night approached. That evening, while pitching camp, they found a clearing where the trees thinned. The wind whipped across it, swirling snow into eddies. Sentries were posted in a wide perimeter. Fires crackled. Cregan sat near one, hugging his cloak around him, staring into the flames. A twig snapped at the edge of the clearing. Then another. All at once, the watchers stood on alert, gripping weapons. Cregan rose, heart pounding. From the darkness emerged a figure, half collapsing into the firelight. It was Jother Marsh, the missing ranger. His face was ashen, lips cracked, eyes wide with terror. He sputtered, they took, the rest, gone. They rushed to catch him before he fell, offering water. Gawain pressed gently, who took them? Wildlings? Marsh's eyes flitted across the men's faces. No wildlings. The cold, gliding shapes, they killed them all. I ran, gods, their eyes, he broke into ragged sobs. I hid under a fallen tree. They left me for dead, or they didn't see me. I heard the screams. Those gathered around exchanged grave looks. The missing patrol? The stories. Cregan felt a sinking certainty. Where? He asked softly, kneeling beside Marsh. The ranger shuddered. A ways north. There's an old ruin, standing stones. They cornered us there. The poor lads cut down like wheat. Then they rose again, by the gods, they rose again. Moved like corpses pulled on strings. He vomited in the snow, trembling uncontrollably. A hush deeper than the winter night settled. The others. Whites. The dreaded nightmares of legend now described by a man near madness with terror. Cregan gripped Marsh's shoulder gently. You're safe now. But was anyone safe? The men stared at Cregan, seeking direction. He swallowed the knot of fear in his throat. We must return to Castle Black with him. Warn the Lord Commander. We can't fight them in these woods if they truly command the dead. We need the Watch's full strength. Nobody argued. They hastily doused the fires, formed a defensive column, and began the trek back through the gloom. Marsh rode in the center, barely coherent, his body convulsing with chills. All around them, the forest loomed with a menace they had never felt before. It was as if the shadows themselves watched. After a nerve-shredding march, they reached the wall. The sight of that colossal barrier offered some small comfort. At Castle Black, Marsh was taken to the healers. The men recounted his account to the Lord Commander. Murmurs of dread swept through the ranks. An emergency council convened, with Maester Ethan and the ranking officers, plus Cregan and Gawain representing the northern forces. "We must confirm this for ourselves," grumbled Ser Alistair, the master-at-arms. "One man's ravings cannot be enough." Cregan bristled. He was a loyal ranger, half-frozen and terrified out of his wits. Would he conjure such a tale? The Lord Commander rubbed his brow. "I believe him. The question is how to respond. If the others truly roam south of the Frostfangs, any direct confrontation might end with our men slaughtered and raised as whites. Our only option may be to defend the wall." An uneasy shift followed. Gawain asked, "What if they can't pass the wall?" It said the wall is warded against them. The children of the forest aided Brandon the Builder in raising it. "Maybe it'll hold them." "That might be so," Lord Commander Ethan said. "But thousands of wildlings are pressing south, not all of them crossing at official gates. If the others follow them around Eastwatch at the sea or scale lesser passes in the west, we're in dire straits." Cregan realized with a chill that the old tales said the wall was built to keep out the others, but it was not certain how absolute its wards were. The slightest gap could let the darkness seep through. "We should strengthen Eastwatch and the Shadow Tower, yes. But we must also rally more men. The Watch alone is too few." The Lord Commander looked grim. "You mean call upon the entire north?" "Yes, and beyond if necessary," Cregan said. "I'll send ravens to all our bannermen, to White Harbor, to the Lords of the Vale if we must. If the threat is real, all Westeros must unite to face it. Or we'll repeat the horrors of the Long Night." Ethan hesitated, but the weight of it was undeniable. "Very well. The time for secrecy is past. We call on the living to stand against the dead." Over the next days, an unrelenting flurry of ravens flew south from Castle Black, carrying dire warnings. Most soared to the northern houses: Manderley, Umber, Bolton, Serwyn, Glover, Hornwood, Flint, Tall Heart, Riswell, and many more. Some flew beyond the neck, though none could guess how lords farther south would react. Cregan suspected that many would dismiss it all as foolish northern panic. Yet he had to try. He also penned a personal letter to Lady Elena Targaryen, reminding her of her vow to aid if the others stirred. He described Marsh's horrifying tale, the footprints, the vanishings, the wildling exodus. He wrote that if the Targaryens possessed any knowledge or power that could help, now was the time. Sealing it with the Stark direwolf, he prayed the raven found Dragonstone swiftly. As for the men at the wall, they prepared for siege and infiltration by an enemy unlike any living foe. Archers fletched dragonglass-tipped arrows, recalling old legends that obsidian could wound the others. The Watch had a small supply of obsidian daggers discovered in ancient caches or found near the lava beds on Dragonstone centuries ago. Cregan had never thought them more than curiosities. But now he oversaw the forging of arrowheads from that precious black glass. If the old tales held truth, obsidian might save lives. But the watchers on the wall saw no sign of an approaching army. The days dragged into a tense standoff. Marsh, delirious, spat out more fragmented horror stories. Some men whispered that the others could vanish into the snow or move in illusions. Gawain tried to keep morale high, but a sense of dread gnawed at them all. Then the wildlings came, not an organized army. More like a flood of desperate people, men, women, children, shambling south with hollow cheeks. They arrived in sporadic groups, sometimes clashing with each other over scant resources. The Watch was overwhelmed at the gates. They could not let thousands of free folk pass. Yet turning them away meant condemning them to freeze or fall prey to the rumored whites. Violence flared. The Stark men found themselves drawn into brutal skirmishes as the wildlings tried to scale the wall or break the gates. Cregan met with the Lord Commander repeatedly, trying to find a strategy. They ended up turning back most wildlings but offering a small number refuge if they laid down arms. "We can't feed them all," the commander grumbled. "But letting them die out there, that feels cruel." "It's them or the others," one hard-eyed ranger said. "Better them than us." Cregan disliked that callousness, but survival demanded harsh choices. He found no easy answers. Meanwhile, scouts returned from beyond the forest, claiming they had glimpsed entire wildling villages left empty. No sign of life save for weird patterns in the snow, like swirling circles. Some men swore they found piles of bones arranged in spiral shapes. A savage intimidation tactic or something more sinister. Hope arrived in the form of more northern bannermen trickling in. Not all answered the call, but enough to swell their forces by hundreds. The Umbers arrived with stout warriors, the Karstarks with disciplined cavalry. Roose Bolton's men came as well, dour and suspicious. The tension among these houses was palpable. Old rivalries flared in the cram. Headquarters of Castle Black. Yet Cregan hammered home the need for unity. They faced an inhuman foe, or so the rumors said, and if they fell to bickering, all was lost. At last, after weeks of mounting anxiety, a single raven returned from Dragonstone. The letter was from Lady Elena. She wrote, "Your warnings have roused us to swift action. We have prepared dragons 3 to be exact and a company of Targaryen knights. By the time this letter reaches you, I may already be en route. Whether it is truly the others or some other evil, I will stand with you as promised. Hold the wall until we arrive. Burn any corpses you find. Do not underestimate the enemy's cunning. Elena Targaryen." Reading those words, Cregan felt a complicated rush of relief and fear. Relief that they would not stand alone, fear of how the North would react to dragons in their sky. Still, if the Targaryens truly brought living fire to bear, it might be a decisive advantage. No one knew for sure if Dragonflame harmed the others, but old ballads suggested they abhorred fire of any kind. He shared the news with Lord Commander Ethan and the assembled northern lords. Reactions varied. Some found hope in the thought of dragons scorching undead hordes. Others muttered that southerners might exploit the crisis to extend their power into the north. Yet none could deny that faced with this threat, they needed every edge. As final preparations advanced, the nights grew eerily quiet. Cregan stood atop the wall often, gazing out over the vast, moonlit forests. Sometimes beneath the swirling snow he glimpsed shapes moving in the dark. Or perhaps it was only his imagination. The cold bit deeper each passing day, as if some unnatural winter sank its claws into the land. Then, one dawn, as the pinkish sky tinged the horizon, the horns of Castle Black sounded 3 blasts. The watchman shouted, "Riders approaching from the north." Immediately men scrambled to vantage points. Cregan rushed to the top of the gatehouse, dread coiling in his belly. An attack? Or something else? The figures emerged from the tree line, half a dozen mounted forms. In the crisp morning air, Cregan recognized them as wildlings. One, riding at the head, held up empty hands in a gesture of truce. The watchers kept arrows nocked. The riders halted within shouting distance of the wall. A woman's voice, strong and defiant, echoed, "I would speak to your commander." Cregan blinked. A woman leading wildlings was not unheard of, but unusual. The Lord Commander joined him. They peered down from the ramparts. The woman on horseback wore furs and leathers. Her hair was braided with bones, and she had a scar across one cheek. She introduced herself as Skara of the Ice River clans. "Why do you come?" the Lord Commander bellowed. Skara raised her voice. "We have knowledge of what hunts our people. Let us in and we'll parley. Otherwise, you'll get no answers." A tense negotiation ensued. Eventually, the watch agreed to let a few wildlings enter unarmed, under guard. The gates opened, the newcomers passed through the tunnel, flanked by black-cloaked rangers. Skara and 2 of her clan companions were led into the common hall, where a council awaited Cregan, Gon, the Lord Commander, and a few northern lords. Skara stood straight, unsmiling. She eyed the men around her, seeming unimpressed. One of her companions had an arm bound in dirty bandages. The other had a battered spear. Clearly, they had seen hardships. Ethan demanded, "Speak. What do you know?" Skara's lip curled. "We know the dead walk. They kill our kin and raise them to fight against us. That's no secret. But there is one leading them. A tall figure in armor of ice, his eyes cold blue. He commands the whites and hunts any living souls who remain beyond the frost fangs. We call him the Pale Lord. He's gathering a legion." A hush fell. Cregan felt a knot in his stomach. The others had a leader? She continued. "We tried to band together, but nothing stops them. No arrow, no blade. Fire slows them, dragonglass can kill a white, but the Pale Lord is different." He turned away an entire volley of arrows with a gesture. "Saw it with my own eyes." One of the northern lords scoffed quietly, but Cregan silenced him with a glare. "Why come here?" "To warn us." Skara nodded curtly. I tried uniting the clans to fight him, but too many have lost hope. They say all that remains is to flee south or die. I won't run, but I can't stand alone. So I came to offer knowledge. If you have the means to fight him, I'll help. My clan will help. The Lord Commander's face was grim. We have men, but do we have the means? Cregan stepped forward. We have some dragon glass, and we expect help from the Targaryens soon. Dragons? At that, Skara's eyes lit with a fierce glint. If your flying lizards can burn the Pale Lord, I'd like to see it. Might be our only chance. Ethan exhaled. We can't just sally forth into the forest blindly. If this Pale Lord has an entire legion, we could be overwhelmed. Still, we can't wait until he has an even larger force. Skara nodded. He moved slowly, gathering more dead with each village he slaughters. Cregan and the others conferred. Some advocated staying behind the wall until the Targaryens arrived, letting the wildlings be the first line of defense. But that was a cowardly stance, and it would only make the enemy stronger by adding the wildlings to its ranks. In the end, they resolved on a bold plan: dispatch a vanguard force north of the wall to locate and harass the Pale Lord's legion, stalling its advance until dragons could arrive. They would not engage in open battle but conduct raids, using fire to destroy whites. Meanwhile, the bulk of the defenders would remain at the wall, prepared for a major confrontation. Skara volunteered to guide them, leading them through wildling paths to avoid detection. Cregan insisted on going. He was no faint-hearted lord to hide behind walls while men risked their lives. Gon demanded to join as well. They gathered 200 chosen fighters, Night's Watch Rangers, Northern soldiers, and Skara's wildlings. Each man was equipped with dragon glass daggers or arrowheads if possible. They carried torches, oil, and anything that could spark flame quickly. They set out at dawn, passing through the wall's gate in disciplined ranks. The cold beyond was brutal, the wind scouring the land. Skara led them east, then north, weaving through the haunted forest. Occasionally they glimpsed small bands of wildlings who fled at first sight, uncertain if these black-clad men and steel-armored northerners were friend or foe. Skara tried to persuade a few to join, but most were too terrified. On the third day, the vanguard sighted the first evidence of their enemy's presence, a small wildling settlement burned out and littered with corpses. They approached warily, weapons ready. The corpses were blackened and twisted in grotesque poses, some partially devoured by scavengers. No footprints except a few that might belong to animals or men. But the atmosphere reeked of dread. Cregan ordered the men to burn the remains to ensure they would not be raised as whites. Thick smoke curled into the ashen sky. They moved on. The next day, near twilight, Skara halted them with a silent hand signal. From the crest of a low hill, they beheld a sight that set hearts pounding, an encampment of the dead. Among the trees below, maybe 100 figures milled in unnerving stillness. Some wore tattered furs, some scraps of armor. Their flesh was pallid, their movements jerky. A faint mist clung to them. This was a white warband blocking the path north. The men crouched among the pines, heart-thudding. They had not expected to face so many so soon. Gon whispered, "Gods be good. If there are 100 here, how many more beyond?" Cregan remembered Marsh's warning, "They rise again." He forced a steadying breath. "We can't fight them all at once. But we can use fire, strike swiftly, retreat. Thin their numbers." Lord Roderick Flint, one of the northern lords who had joined the vanguard, nodded grimly. "Let's be about it." They split into smaller groups, circling the clearing. Bows were strung, dragon-glass arrows readied. Torches were lit from sheltered positions, the flicker hidden behind cloaks so as not to give away their location prematurely. Then, at a signal from Cregan, they unleashed a volley at the whites. The arrows hissed through the air, striking rotting flesh. Many whites staggered or fell. More men launched flaming arrows at the deeper ranks. Fire licked through matted furs and dried flesh. A few heartbeats of confusion among the undead, then they turned their hollow-eyed gazes toward the attackers, lurching forward with rasping moans. The vanguard rushed to meet them from multiple angles, brandishing torches and dragaglass blades. In the thick of it, Cregan discovered the horrifying truth: a white could keep coming even with half its body burned or an arm severed. Only a solid blow to the head or the use of fire or obsidian ended them swiftly. They fought with unnatural strength, unfeeling. Several men were dragged down, screaming. Gon hacked and slashed at a pair of whites that lunged at him, cleaving one's skull and burying a dragonglass dagger in the other's chest. Skara's war cry rang out. Her spear, tipped with obsidian, skewered a white through the throat. Lord Flint swung a flaming torch, igniting a ring of grass around a knot of undead, trapping them in a circle of flame. The chaos lasted mere minutes but felt like hours. Finally, the whites were shattered, burned, or scattered. The vanguard pulled back, panting. They had lost maybe a dozen men and several more were wounded. Cregan ordered the bodies of the fallen burned at once, including their own. No one would leave a companion's corpse to rise again. The men stood among the smoldering remains, exhaustion and horror etched on their faces. Even 100 whites had nearly overrun them. Cregan felt a cold fear. If the Pale Lord commanded thousands, how could they stand? The best they could do was harass smaller groups, hamper the legion's approach until the dragons arrived. Skara scouted ahead, returning near midnight with a grim report. Larger gatherings of whites lay beyond, traveling in loose bands. They converge on the Fist of the First Men, she said. That's where Harik the Crow and some free folk were rumored to gather. If the Pale Lord crushes them, his ranks will swell further. Cregan clenched his teeth. The Fist of the First Men was an ancient ring fort on a hill, one of the few defensible spots beyond the wall. If wildlings were pinned there, a slaughter would yield even more whites. Then we must go there, try to help Harik hold out or break the siege. That's the only chance to prevent a massive new wave from forming. Weariness weighed on everyone, but the urgency was clear. They marched through the night, glimpsing columns of drifting snow that might hide enemies. Every crack of a branch, every hoot of an owl, set nerves on edge. Dawn broke, gray and sullen. High overhead, ravens circled, drawn by the promise of carrion. At midday, they reached the ridge overlooking the Fist of the First Men, a wide, sloping hill crowned by an ancient earthen embankment and ring of stones. From vantage points among the scraggly pines, they saw hundreds of wildlings huddled on that hill, ringed by a swarming tide of whites. The undead circled, lunging at the defenses, sometimes retreating as the wildlings fought back with fire-tipped spears. Smoke rose from the battered fort. How many whites? Gon muttered. It looks like hundreds. Possibly more. Too many for a frontal assault, Lord Flint said, face tight. Cregan surveyed the terrain. The whites were concentrated on the southern slope where the ring fort's main entrance lay. The north side was steeper, but the whites had begun to encircle it as well. We must create a distraction. Attack from the flank with fire, draw them away so the wildlings can break out. A nod went through the group. They prepared as best they could, gathering all the kindling, oil, and torches. Then they advanced, hearts pounding. Once in position, they launched flaming arrows into the midst of the undead lines. The whites reeled, some catching fire. The entire horde stirred like an enraged hornet's nest, turning in that direction. A second volley soared in, arcing overhead. Meanwhile, a small detachment led by Gon crept closer to hack at the whites' flank with obsidian weapons, sowing further chaos. A savage melee ensued. The undead hissed and groaned, surging forward, their rotted fingers grasping. The defenders burned them in clusters, shooting them with dragaglass arrows. Skara's wildlings hurled flaming javelins. Outnumbered, the vanguard retreated step by step, but they drew more and more whites away from the ring fort. From the corner of his eye, Cregan saw the gate on the Fist open, and Harik's free folk poured out, joining the fray with savage yells. The plan seemed to be working until a blast of icy wind swept the hill. Men staggered, eyes watering. Cregan heard a distant, piercing sound, like a horn note but too shrill. The temperature seemed to drop in an instant. Then, at the crest of the ridge, a tall figure appeared. Armor like translucent ice, a pale blade in hand. Blue eyes burned with malevolence. Skara hissed, "That's him. The Pale Lord." He lifted his sword, and the wind intensified. Snow whipped in a vortex around him. The whites stiffened, then renewed their assault with frightening coordination. Several men cried out in panic as the undead overwhelmed them. Fire flared as torches were dropped, half extinguished in the swirling snow. The Pale Lord advanced with eerie grace, heading for the cluster of vanguard fighters in the clearing. Cregan felt fear coil around his heart like a serpent. Yet he refused to yield. Lifting his voice, he shouted, "Archers! Target him!" A dozen dragonglass-tipped arrows flew, aimed at the tall figure. He made a sweeping gesture with his blade. A gust of wind deflected or shattered most of the arrows midair. One clipped his shoulder, but it bounced off as if striking rock. He did not even pause. Men cursed in disbelief. The others were vulnerable to dragoglass, yet this one seemed shielded by sorcery or a thicker hide. Cregan snatched a torch from a fallen comrade, calling to Gon, "We have to break their formation or it's over." Gon nodded, rallying a handful of men. They waded into the press of whites, setting them aflame at close range. Each step was a fight for their lives. Corpses clawed at them from all angles. The Pale Lord glided closer, raising that pale sword. He slashed through a northern warrior's steel blade as though it were made of tin, severing the man's arm in a spray of blood. Cregan's mind raced. Their meager band could not overcome that entity. He remembered the Targaryens, Dragonflame was not yet here. The only chance was to buy time, help the wildlings escape, and retreat to the wall. If the Pale Lord advanced with his legion, they needed the entire watch and, God's willing, the Targaryens. Bellowing a retreat order, Cregan grabbed Gon's shoulder. Fall back. Men began disengaging, using torches and dragonglass to keep the whites at bay. Harrick and his free folk did likewise, trying to press south. The battlefield descended into chaos, with swirling snow, screaming horses, and the dreadful moans of the dead. Somehow they tore free, leaving bodies and a burning ring behind them. The Pale Lord watched them depart, making no effort to pursue swiftly. Perhaps he was content to let them flee, knowing more conquests lay ahead. Cregan glanced over his shoulder, breath ragged, seeing the tall figure fade into the flurries. They spent days in brutal retreat, harried by smaller packs of whites. The wildlings from the Fist scattered, though some joined Skara's group. Gon was wounded, a slash on his thigh from a white's jagged nails. They burned the wound, hoping to stave off infection or worse. At last, battered and half-frozen, the survivors stumbled back through the wall's gates. The watch greeted them with relief and horror, for their losses were grievous. Out of 200, barely 100 had returned. Cregan gave a grim report to the Lord Commander and the assembled lords. The Pale Lord was real, commanding a formidable force, and the whites were no rumor. Their only hope was to hold the wall and pray that Targaryen dragons arrived soon. A hush settled as the Northmen realized they stood on the threshold of an existential war. Word spread like wildfire through Castle Black. Fear mingled with resolve, forging a desperate unity. The men redoubled efforts to gather dragonglass, to reinforce barricades, to scout the coasts for any sign of an end run around the wall. Cregan wrote another urgent raven to Alina, begging her to hurry. Days turned to weeks. Tension soared. The watchers along the top of the wall kept vigilant, scanning the northern horizon day and night. Occasionally, small groups of whites probed the edges, testing defenses. The men used fire arrows to drive them off. Corpses littered the base of the wall, blackened lumps on the snow. Each day, more wildlings arrived, some surrendering, others trying to slip past. The watch turned most away, though a few were spared. Castle Black groaned under the strain. Finally, at dawn on a frigid morning, horns blared 3 times from the watchtowers. "Riders!" a voice shouted. "No, look, in the sky!" Cregan, having just risen from a restless sleep, rushed outside. He glanced upward, heart hammering. Against the rosy sky to the southeast, 3 winged silhouettes approached. Dragons! Their leathery wings beat the air, each beast large enough to cast a long shadow over the snow. A ripple of awe and trepidation swept through the men. The dragons descended in wide circles, accompanied by a smaller retinue on horseback far below. The watchers parted as one of the dragons, a sleek, dark-green beast, landed in the open field near the wall's base, sending up gusts of ice-crusted snow. Cregan advanced cautiously, a dozen men flanking him. The dragon's great head swiveled, snorting steam. Upon its back sat Alina Targaryen, hair whipped by the wind, eyes fierce. Beside her, on lesser dragons, were 2 Targaryen knights sworn to her family. Alina climbed down, the ground trembling with each step of her mount. She approached, removing her riding gloves, face etched with urgency. "Lord Cregan," she called over the rush of wind, "we came as fast as we could. Tell me, what do we face?" Cregan bowed, relief surging even through his fear. "My lady, you come not a moment too soon. The others are here, led by a being we call the Pale Lord. They have an army of whites beyond the wall, growing every day. We need your fire." Her lips tightened and she glanced at her dragons. "Then I shall use it. Show me where to strike." And so, at the edge of the known world, under a bleak winter sky, the ancient powers of ice and fire gathered for a confrontation that would shape the fate of Westeros. The realm had been spared one doom by Brandon Stark's grim act in Valyria, but now a second doom loomed, the doom of ice of the others. Whether the living could triumph or whether the tide of undeath would drown them all in eternal night was a question no prophecy could fully answer. Yet they stood, resolute, forging alliances between houses once sundered by distance and suspicion. Targaryen flame had arrived to meet Stark steel, with the scattered free folk and the embattled Night's Watch standing at their side. A douse stretched across the snow, cast by dragons overhead. The wind carried the promise of a final reckoning. And in the silence before the storm, one might almost hear the murmur of the old gods through the weirwood trees, remembering the price once paid to save the world from fire, and now bracing to save it from ice. Whether that sacrifice would suffice a second time, only the dawn would tell. Cregan Stark stood with his back against the colossal ice blocks of the wall, the wind tugging at his hair, as Aelina Targaryen's dark green dragon settled upon a churned patch of snow. The sudden rush of heat from the dragon's nostrils melted the topmost crust, sending thin rivulets of water trickling down toward the frozen earth. Men throughout Castle Black's courtyard gaped, enthralled and uneasy, watching the three dragons circle, their forms silhouettes against the steel-gray sky. For many, it was the first time they had ever laid eyes on such creatures, beasts from legend and rumor, come to life at the edge of the world. Aelina herself was still pulling off her riding gloves as she stepped toward Cregan. Her eyes shone with urgency. A swirl of winter wind tossed stray strands of silver-gold hair across her face. Her cloak bore the Targaryen crest in subdued embroidery, though the swirling snow made it difficult to see details. She looked travel-worn yet resolute, her cheeks reddened by the cold. The two additional dragons landed farther off, one a pale silver beast with black flecks across its wings, the other a larger, coal-dark creature whose roar reverberated across the courtyard. Their riders and a handful of Targaryen knights dismounted, stamping numb feet on the frozen ground. "Your ravens spoke of a grave threat," she called, voice pitched over the tumult of men's shouts and the hissing steam from dragon nostrils. "We've come as quickly as we could. How dire is it?" Cregan ran a hand over his beard, flecked with ice crystals. "Dire enough that half the Night's Watch stands in fear. The Pale Lord leads an army of whites beyond the wall. We've scouted them. We've fought them. We've lost good men." Alina's expression hardened. Around her, the Watchers gave the dragons a wide berth. Even the most stalwart veterans seemed uncertain how to greet such monstrous allies. "Show me the Lord Commander," she said. "We must plan." Without further ceremony, she followed Cregan inside, accompanied by her sworn knights and the two other dragon riders, who removed their flight leathers to reveal the black and red garb of House Targaryen beneath. Passing through the gates of Castle Black, they soon reached the common hall, where the Lord Commander, Ethan Snow, and several northern lords had gathered in anticipation of the Targaryens' arrival. The gloom of the hall pressed close, lit only by torches and braziers, but the presence of a dragon rider lent it a surreal glow. Aelina inclined her head respectfully. "Lord Commander, Lords of the North." Her voice was smooth but urgent. "We stand at your service." Lord Commander Ethan, grim-faced, gestured for her to sit at a rough-hewn table. She remained standing, however, braced as though every moment might bring battle. "We have tidings both old and new," Ethan said, tone flat. "The others are real, my lady. The dead rise beneath their command. We've lost patrols, we've seen whites with our own eyes, and we've received word of a monstrous force massing in the far north. We've tried to slow their advance, but they keep coming." Aelina listened keenly. Her knights cast sidelong glances at the black cloaks of the Watch, at the fur-clad northern lords, at the battered, soot-stained handful of free folk milling near the door. All of it hinted at a ragged alliance forged in desperation. "Our dragons will help, but we must use them wisely," Aelina said, her voice carrying a quiet authority that drew the men's attention. "If these others can raise the dead, we cannot afford to let them kill too many of our own in open battle. Every fallen warrior becomes a new addition to their legion. Fire is our ally, but even Dragaflame cannot be everywhere at once." One of the Targaryen knights, Ser Varen, a tall man with silvered hair, spoke up. "Is it true these creatures are vulnerable to obsidian and possibly Valyrian steel as well?" Cregan, leaning forward with his hands braced on the table, nodded. "We believe so. That's what the old stories say. We've used obsidian arrowheads against whites with success, but the Pale Lord himself. We saw him turn aside a volley of dragon-glass arrows as if the wind itself shielded him. Ordinary steel did nothing. Fire scorched some of his minions, but we've yet to see him tested by the full might of dragon fire." Aelina let out a measured breath. "Then we must try. But first, we need to know where he is and how large his army has grown." Ethan gestured at a crude map laid on the tabletop showing the lands beyond the wall. We have reports that the Pale Lord is rallying near the Milkwater River beyond the Frostfangs. Thousands of wildlings have fled south. A few remain trapped in the interior, forced to fight or hide. Our scouts say the Whites roam widely, harassing small pockets of survivors. Our last major encounter was near the Fist of the First Men. We managed a fighting retreat, but the Pale Lord nearly slaughtered us to the last man. Elena and her knights exchanged grave looks. Then we must do more than wait here for them to come, she said. We Targaryens did not fly north just to defend the wall. We aim to take the fight to them if we can. Dragons in the open sky will have a greater chance to strike from above. But we'll need a ground force to coordinate, isolate pockets of Whites, and burn them. We must keep them from scattering or flanking us. Cregan felt the tension in the room, a mixture of hope, fear, and determination. He spoke quietly, mindful of the near dozen men who hung on every word. We can muster a war band. The Northmen here, plus a corps of experienced Night's Watch Rangers, plus the free folk who want to fight. We can meet your dragons somewhere beyond the wall where we have enough space to maneuver, but not so far that we lose hope of retreating. We'll need to draw the Pale Lord out. If he remains hidden, we cannot strike him cleanly. A low murmur rippled among the lords. Roose Bolton's representative, a lean man named Kelric, sneered. Do we have to venture into that frozen hell just to throw ourselves at an army of corpses? Perhaps we're safer letting them come here. Elena shot him a cold glance. If they come to you on their own terms, you'll face a legion far larger than anything you can handle. The moment they surround the wall in full force, they'll test every weakness. Better to keep them scattered, picking them off in pieces. Otherwise, you risk a siege of the wall, unlike any the Night's Watch has ever faced. Ethan nodded heavily. I'm forced to agree. We cannot let them grow unchecked. If what you say is true, that you can bring dragons to the field, a well-coordinated assault might cut down swathes of Whites, hopefully including some of the others themselves. That might break their command structure. Cregan studied the map. His own exhaustion weighed on him. He had fought multiple engagements, lost men, watched the fear in their eyes. Still, he felt a stubborn resolve. We must also recall that the Pale Lord is not alone. The stories suggest more others exist, though we've only seen him as the figurehead. Even if we kill him, might there be others waiting to take his place? Elena's violet eyes flickered with an inner fire. We can only hope that by striking him down, if we can strike him down, we sow enough confusion to stop their advance. Then perhaps any remaining others might retreat or bide their time. They haven't dared come south in thousands of years. Maybe dealing a blow now would set them back another age. The men conferred on details, where to strike, how to proceed. The watchers in the hall listened silently. The final plan emerged with no illusions of glory. They would gather a mixed host of 700 or so Night's Watch Rangers, Northern Warriors, Free Folk Volunteers, and Targaryen Knights. Lady Elena and her two allied dragon riders, Ser Varen and Ser Leah, all capable of unleashing flames from above, would coordinate by scouting from the sky. If they managed to isolate the Pale Lord's main column, they would strike hard, using ring fires, dragoglass weapons, and dragon flame to cut off segments of the undead. I'll ride at the head of our ground forces, Cregan concluded. Gon will join me if his wound permits. He glanced at his brother, who stood near the back, leaning on a crutch. The white that had raked Gon's thigh had left a deep gash. Are you sure you can handle it? Gon lifted his chin, wincing. It'll heal. I won't sit idle while the world ends. Skara, the wildling woman who had guided them before, spoke up from her position by the doorway. She had been quietly observing, arms folded over her chest. I'll bring some of my people to lead you through the safest passes. If we catch the Pale Lord near the Milkwater, we can limit his movement with the high ridges on one side and the river on the other. If he tries to slip away, that's where your dragons come in. Elena studied her with appraisal. We'll do our utmost. But be warned, dragons are not invincible. We must not let the others get too close or use sorcery against our mounts. We'll strike swiftly and circle away. With that tenuous agreement, the men began to disperse. Preparations had to be made swiftly. Elena moved off with her knights to check on the dragons, ensuring they had adequate space for temporary roosts. Cregan sent runners to gather volunteers, arms, and supplies, particularly dragoglass arrowheads. The watchers in the courtyard stared as the Targaryen dragons loomed behind the fortress, each beast exhaling gusts of heated breath into the cold air. The presence of living flame gave a spark of hope, but also a bone-deep sense of how precarious everything was. If even dragons could fall in battle against the others, then no living soul was truly safe. Word spread through Castle Black that a grand attack was forming. Some men embraced the coming battle with fatalistic zeal, others trembled at the notion of marching beyond the wall again. Still, enough had seen the whites firsthand to understand that cowering behind the ramparts would only delay the inevitable. The free folk were of two minds, some thirsted to strike back at the nightmares that had driven them from their homes, while others believed any confrontation a fool's errand. Skara rallied those who would fight, promising them that with dragons overhead they might stand a chance. Even Harik the Crow, the wildling chieftain from the Fist of the First Men, agreed to bring a small band of spear wives and raiders. Harik's eyes burned with vengeance for fallen kin. Together, they prepared for a do-or-die gamble in the heart of the frozen wilderness. That evening, Cregan found himself by the great fire in the courtyard, sharpening a sword that he doubted would do much good against the others. He had also secured a Valyrian steel dagger, an heirloom from a minor northern house that had quietly offered it to him, hoping it might prove useful. The blade was named Icebane, though no one knew how ancient or storied it was. Cregan's father had once told him that Valyrian steel might be a match for the White Walkers, but no one had tested such a theory in living memory. He could only pray the old stories held truth. A hush fell as Alina Targaryen approached, her footfalls muffled in the fresh snow. She wore a thick cloak of black fur, a stark contrast to her pale hair and violet eyes. In one gloved hand, she held a small packet of something that gleamed darkly when she angled it toward the firelight. "This is what remains of our store of dragaglass from Dragonstone," she said quietly. "We've forged arrowheads and spear points, as many as we can manage. It's not enough to arm every man, but it might tip the scales." She passed the packet to Cregan, who saw dozens of slender shards, each sharpened to a lethal point. "We appreciate it," he said, tucking them away. "The watch is forging more from the caches they had, but the glass is brittle. We've lost half the arrowheads we tried to set. At least your supply might be sturdier." She nodded, gaze drifting to the flickering flames of the brazier. For a moment, the lines of her face betrayed weariness. "When my father fled Valyria, he never imagined we'd fight the White Walkers at the edge of the world. Yet here we are." She let out a measured breath. "It's a grim honor to fulfill the pact that Brandon Stark and I made so many years ago, though I suppose it was a pact in spirit more than in words." Cregan looked at her closely. "My father seldom spoke of the details, but you were close. He took the knowledge of the dooms caused to his grave. Sometimes I wonder if we pay the price for that choice even now." Alina did not flinch from the hint of accusation. "We saved the world from Valyria's shadow, or so we believed. The old gods demanded it. Yet the forces of ice still stir. Perhaps in the cosmic balance, neither side, fire nor ice, can remain dormant forever. In quelling one threat, maybe we only delayed the other. Prophecy rarely grants perfect solutions. Only choices." Cregan watched the flickering reflection of flames in her eyes. "Now we face the consequences. But I'd rather we face it together than alone. My father would have said the same." She nodded solemnly. "He would have." Then, with a slight shift in her stance, she let out a breath. "I suggest you rest if you can. We set forth at first light." He nodded, though he doubted rest would come easily. Even as she turned away, heading back toward the stables where her retinue prepared, Cregan stood motionless by the fire, thoughts churning. The memory of his father's legacy, the secret impetus for Valyria's downfall, now collided with the renewed threat from the north. Sometimes he wondered if the realm was trapped in a cycle of catastrophe, pivoting between monstrous foes. He silently vowed to do everything in his power to shatter that cycle, if only for his own generation. Even if it cost his life. Dawn arrived beneath a sullen sky, the sun little more than a dim glow behind cloud banks. The chill was knife-sharp. Nevertheless, hundreds of men mustered in Castle Black's courtyard, while 3 dragons soared overhead, circling like predators hungry for war. At a command from Lord Commander Ethan, the black gate of the wall groaned open. A slow, steady column of warriors trudged forth, bearing torches and supplies, spiked maces, spears tipped with dragaglass or steel. Targaryen knights in black armor rode at the flanks, their cloaks snapping in the bitter wind. At the vanguard was Cregan Stark, flanked by Gon, who bore his own sword and a limp that he tried to hide, and by Skara, face grim with purpose. A hush seemed to settle over the entire world as they passed beyond the safety of the wall. The haunted forest stretched before them, an endless maze of snow-laden trees and hidden ravines. For days, they marched north and west, always with the dragons overhead, scouting. More than once, the watchers on the ground glimpsed the outlines of white bands in the distance. At times, the dragons dived, unleashing plumes of flame that lit the sky orange in the half-light of midday. Usually, the whites scattered, vanishing among the trees. Yet each small victory cheered the men. They saw with their own eyes that dragon fire reduced the dead to ash. Nevertheless, the Pale Lord remained elusive. Several times Ser Varen, astride the pale silver dragon, reported glimpses of a tall figure on a distant ridge, only for it to vanish in swirling snow. Rumors spread among the ranks that the White Walkers commanded the wind itself, conjuring storms to conceal their movements. Some men muttered prayers to the Seven, others to the old gods. The free folk simply spat on the ground, muttering that they needed no prayers, just fire and steel. It was on the 6th day of their advance that the real test began. Near the upper reaches of the Milkwater River, the land opened into a broad, frozen valley flanked by craggy hills. Skara reported that the main body of the Undead Legion was encamped or moving somewhere north of the valley. The dragon soared overhead, seeking an ideal vantage. On the ground, Cregan and his commanders decided to set a trap of sorts. They'd form a defensive ring near a meander of the Milkwater and lure the Whites into attacking, counting on the dragons to strike from above. The hope was that the Pale Lord himself might appear to direct his forces. The hours that followed were a flurry of frantic preparations. Men shoved sharpened stakes into the frozen earth, built hasty palisades from fallen timber, spread flammable pitch across likely approach routes. All the while, the temperature dropped steadily. The clouds thickened and an unnatural hush blanketed the valley. Cregan could feel it in his bones, the presence of something old and malevolent, watching them from beyond the icy ridges. His breath steamed in short bursts as he walked the perimeter, exchanging quiet words of encouragement with the men. Gawain, though still limping, offered a wan grin. "We've come a long way from Winterfell's practice yard, haven't we?" Cregan tried to smile back. "Never thought we'd stand here, facing an army of the dead." He patted Gawain's shoulder gently. "Stay close. We'll need each other before this is through." They parted ways, each overseeing a different segment of the line. The free folk clustered near the west flank, Harik the Crow and Skara among them, forming a roving skirmish group armed with dragoglass spears and axes. The Night's Watch men held the center, determined to stand fast. On the flanks, the Targaryen knights readied themselves with torches, prepared to set the pitch alight on command. Overhead, Elena circled on her green dragon, a majestic silhouette against the brooding sky. Occasionally, the dragon's roar split the silence, echoing off the distant hills. Cregan glanced up, feeling a surge of gratitude and worry. He prayed that the beast would remain safe, that the White Walkers couldn't conjure some dark magic to bring a dragon down. As dusk encroached, the watchers in the forward pickets sounded the alarm, movement in the northern reaches of the valley. Cregan peered through a spyglass. A thick line of shapes advanced slowly over the snow, a mass of silent, shuffling figures. Whites? Dozens? No, hundreds. Possibly more. The approach was methodical, as if an unseen hand guided them. Fear coursed through the men, but Cregan bellowed for them to stand firm, reminding them of the plan. The Targaryens had already arranged themselves. Elena's dragon soared higher, while Ser Varen's silver beast and Ser Lea's dark one took up flanking positions. The final rays of daylight glinted off their scaled hides. Cregan saw the silhouettes of the riders leaning forward, scanning the ground below. Then, at some signal, the dragons began a measured descent. On the valley floor, the Whites came closer, close enough for the watchers to see their pallid, distorted faces. Some wore the tattered remains of wildling garb, some ragged Night's Watch cloaks, others the scraps of who knew how many fallen souls. An unearthly stillness accompanied them, no war cries, no moans beyond the occasional rattling hiss. The living drew weapons, hearts pounding in unison. Suddenly the front ranks of the Whites broke into a lurching, unnatural run. They arced toward the defensive ring with unnerving speed, feet barely slipping on the ice. The men at the barricades shouted warnings, loosing arrows tipped with dragoglass. Some Whites dropped as the arrows struck true, but others kept coming, unaffected by steel points or glancing shots. Moments later, they crashed against the palisade. Night's Watch rangers thrust spears over the top, while free folk jabbed from the sides. The stench of decaying flesh filled the air. Then a draconic roar split the heavens and a river of flame spewed from above. Elena's dragon strafed the white horde, igniting them in great gouts of orange fire. The front ranks hissed and collapsed, blackening to ash in seconds. Cheers erupted from the defenders as Ser Varen's silver dragon followed, unleashing a sweeping flame that carved a path of destruction through the undead. But the Whites behind kept coming, clambering over their burning kin without pause. Cregan shouted for the men to hold tight, brandishing his Valyrian steel dagger in one hand, a torch in the other. Once the Whites pressed closer, he and those around him lit the pitch-soaked ground. Blue-orange flames roared up, forming a temporary wall of fire that severed a swath of the undead from the main body. Trapped in the blaze, the Whites flailed, some staggering away in flames. Archers took advantage, sending more obsidian arrows into the charred ranks. For a moment it seemed they might drive back the assault. But from the gloom behind the whites, a second wave emerged, possibly twice as large as the first. The defenders cursed, hearts sinking as they realized how many corpses the Pale Lord had at his command. The numbers were staggering. Where had he found so many dead? Possibly from centuries of wildling graves, from entire hidden tombs, from the remains of small clans. Each new wave hammered at the barricades, forced to funnel into the valley's choke point, but still overwhelming in sheer volume. The dragons dove again, torching entire knots of undead. Plumes of black smoke curled into the sky. The flickering light of widespread fires illuminated the valley, casting everything in a surreal, hellish glow. Men roared in determination or despair, hacking at wights that clambered over the stakes. Some free folk used giant axes to split skulls, while Targaryen knights in blackened armor swung flails that smashed rotting bodies aside. Everywhere was a swirl of chaos, fire, shrieks, flailing limbs. Cregan lost track of time in the heat of the fight. A wight lunged at him from behind the barricade, jaws snapping, but he drove the Valyrian's steel dagger into its skull. The creature collapsed instantly as if a puppet whose strings were cut. Another wight grabbed at his legs and he kicked it away, letting another man finish it off with a torch. His arms felt heavy with exertion, adrenaline spiking again and again. Above, he glimpsed the wide wings of a dragon passing overhead and briefly felt thankful for the monstrous roars that indicated they still lived. In the midst of that grueling defense, the temperature plummeted further. A swirl of snow and ice-laden wind swept across the battlefield, snuffing out some smaller fires. Men shouted in alarm as the flames died, plunging pockets of the valley into near darkness. A shape moved on the far ridge, a tall figure in glimmering ice armor, pale blade in hand. The Pale Lord. He stood, surveying the battle from a distance. Then, with measured steps, he descended toward the field, accompanied by several other tall silhouettes. They moved as if gliding over the snow, the wind following their command. A hush of dread rippled through the defenders. The White Walkers, the others. Not just one, but a handful, their eyes shining with cold, malevolent light. The Targaryen dragons roared overhead. One, the darkest beast, peeled away from the main fight to unleash flame upon the approaching others, but the White Walkers raised their arms. The wind howled, swirling the snow into a thick vortex, and the fire blast dissipated, parted as if struck by an invisible barrier of ice. The dragon, startled, banked away, circling for another pass. Serlia, perched on its back, could be heard cursing as the creature roared in frustration. The Pale Lord kept advancing, a slow, implacable march. Behind him, more wights rose, stumbling from behind the ridges. Cregan realized with horror that no matter how many they burned, the others had more. The men near him saw it too, fatigue and terror lining their faces. Gon stumbled past, wiping blood from his brow, breathing hard. "We can't hold forever," he gasped. Cregan swallowed. "We just need to hold until the Targaryens can bring their fire to bear on the others themselves. If we let them close in, it's over." He turned to a handful of watchers. "Signal the dragons. We need them to concentrate on the Pale Lord now." A man raised a horn, blowing a long blast that echoed across the valley. Another man waved a burning brand in a distinct pattern. Overhead, Elena's dragon angled its wings, responding to the call. Yet as she descended for a direct attack, the swirling storm intensified. Blades of ice hung in the air, the wind so bitter it made men's eyes water. Another gout of dragon flame arced down, only to sputter in the gale as the White Walkers parted it with a gesture. Some of the flames struck the ground, igniting wights, but the others themselves remained unscathed. Skara and her free folk, determined to disrupt the Pale Lord's advance, led a reckless charge from the side. They hurled dragonglass spears at the White Walkers. One spear struck the flank of a tall figure who was not the Pale Lord but another of the others. The being let out a rasping hiss, stumbling as cracks spread through its icy armor. Then it shattered, collapsing into a burst of frost. For one heartbeat, hope flared among the living. The others could be killed. But that moment of victory was short-lived. The Pale Lord turned his gaze on Skara's band. His eyes gleamed an otherworldly blue as he raised one hand. A wave of cold blasted out from him, freezing the ground, swirling with shards of ice. The free folk cried out as the sudden blast threw them to the ground, some battered by chunks of frozen debris. Skara herself staggered, losing grip on her spear. Harik the crow seized her arm, dragging her behind a rocky outcropping as the Pale Lord glided closer. The temperature around him felt unnatural, sharp enough to burn a man's lungs with each breath. "This is it," Cregan thought, heart-hammering. "If we cannot strike him down now, we lose." He motioned urgently to the archers at the palisade. "Focus on that one in the center. Use dragonglass or fire arrows." but the swirling blizzard made aiming nearly impossible. Most shots flew wide or were swept aside by the Pale Lord's conjured winds. A new roar shook the sky, Elena's dragon diving again, this time from behind the Pale Lord, out of the storm's main path. A torrent of flame cascaded, momentarily lighting the gloom like a sunrise. The Pale Lord turned, blade upraised. The wind howled, but the angle of attack was cunning. Though the flame parted somewhat, a portion of it swept around, licking the White Walker's flank. He staggered, an eerie shriek ripping from his throat. Steam hissed where fire met ice. Men cheered, but too soon. The Pale Lord twisted, hurling his free hand outward as if casting something invisible. Elena's dragon recoiled mid-dive, roaring in sudden distress. Above them all, the storm flared, and shards of ice peppered the beast's hide. For a moment, it seemed the dragon would crash. Yet Elena steadied her mount, pulling up with powerful wing beats. She soared away, trailing black smoke from some wound. The watchers below realized that, while the others clearly felt pain from direct flame, they possessed fearsome powers of their own. Amid the swirling chaos, Cregan saw a fleeting chance. The Pale Lord's attention was on Elena's dragon. His swirling storm had parted slightly, leaving a narrow corridor from the barricades to where the White Walker stood. Without time to think, Cregan seized a burning torch and his Valyrian steel dagger, motioning to a handful of the bravest men around him. "With me," he shouted over the maelstrom. They vaulted the barricade, stumbling through the snowdrifts, hacking at any wights that lurched in their path. Dragonglass arrows whistled overhead, some finding marks. Gawain, unable to run quickly, still followed with fierce determination, brandishing a torch. Lord Flynn joined them, as did a few watchmen. The wind tore at their cloaks, biting their faces. They could see the Pale Lord's tall form glinting with a slight sheen of frost on his armor just beyond a cluster of half-burned whites. Cregan lunged, driving his torch into the chest of a wight that leapt from the side. Flames engulfed it. Another wight clutched at him, but he slashed with his dagger, the Valyrian steel biting clean through rotted sinew. The swirl of snow parted just enough for him to glimpse the Pale Lord's face, grotesquely beautiful in its alien perfection. Eyes two chips of blue fire. A spike of raw terror threatened to freeze Cregan's limbs. He forced himself to keep moving, each step a monumental effort. The Pale Lord whipped around, noticing the small group charging. He raised that tall, pale sword. Ice crystals gathered around the blade, forming a spear of frost. He hurled it. Cregan dove aside, hearing a shriek behind him as one of the men was impaled. The man's body froze instantly, coated in a web of ice. Gawain nearly stumbled over the corpse, cursing. With a bestial yell, Cregan hurled his torch at the Pale Lord. The White Walker batted it aside effortlessly, but the momentary distraction was enough for Cregan to close distance. He slashed with the Valyrian steel dagger. The Pale Lord parried with his own blade. Sparks flew, and to Cregan's astonishment, the Valyrian steel did not shatter as normal steel would have. Instead, it held firm, deflecting the frozen blade. The Pale Lord's eyes widened, if such a thing could be said of that icy visage. Cregan pressed his advantage, hacking again. The clang of metal on ice rang out. The White Walker moved with supernatural speed, weaving around the dagger's arc, thrusting forward. Cregan barely managed to twist aside. He felt a searing cold slice his shoulder. Pain flared, like frostbite in an instant. His arm went numb, but he gritted his teeth, swinging with his good arm. The Pale Lord ducked, delivering a savage backhand that sent Cregan tumbling in the snow. Lord Flint charged in next, driving a dragonglass-tipped spear. He managed to strike the White Walker's side. A web of cracks appeared in the being's armor, and it hissed. Yet the Pale Lord raked a clawed hand across Flint's face, dropping him in a spray of blood. Gawain tried to jab with a torch, but the White Walker kicked him aside, sending him sprawling. A swirl of wind rose again, the Pale Lord's power intensifying. The snow whipped so fiercely that men could barely see. Cregan struggled to stand, clutching his numb shoulder, the dagger still in his grip. Through the haze of swirling snow, he glimpsed the White Walker raising that frost-laden blade, preparing to finish him off. For a heartbeat, an odd calm stole over Cregan. He thought of his wife, Alyssa, back at Winterfell, of his young son Torrin, of everything he had vowed to protect. He refused to let it end here. Then a deafening roar split the air. accompanied by a sudden blast of intense heat. Alina's green dragon tore down from above, ignoring the barrage of ice shards, unleashing a concentrated torrent of flame directly at the Pale Lord. This time, the blast struck at closer range, scorching the ground in a wide arc. The White Walker twisted, raising his arms, but the torrent was too strong. Fire enveloped him in a swirl of steam and sparks. A shrill scream tore from his lips. Through the flames, Cregan saw him stagger, armor cracking, the icy visage melting in patches. Wasting no second, Cregan lunged forward. He felt nothing in his frozen shoulder, but adrenaline propelled him. He drove the Valyrian steel dagger straight into the Pale Lord's chest, pushing through the cracks. A burst of frigid air slammed him backward, but the blade found its mark. The White Walker froze in place, a web of frost fracturing across his form. His mouth opened in a silent wail, and then, like spun glass colliding with stone, he shattered. Shards of ice rained down, dissolving into a fine mist almost immediately. Cregan hit the ground, panting, eyes wide. The swirl of wind around them suddenly eased as though some tether had been cut. The storm still raged overhead, but the direct malevolent force seemed diminished. Gon staggered to his side, face etched with awe and relief. "Gods, you killed him. You actually killed him." Cregan clutched the dagger's hilt, now slick with melting ice shards, but the blade itself remained intact. He forced himself to his feet, ignoring the throbbing pain in his shoulder. Nearby, the ground was littered with corpses, living and dead alike. Smoke drifted from the scorched snow. It was the dragon flame and the Valyrian steel, he managed. "I just finished what Alina started." All around them, the whites seemed momentarily confused, reeling as if directionless. But in pockets along the valley, other White Walkers remained, spurring the undead forward. The fight was far from over, but men who witnessed the Pale Lord's destruction cheered, taking heart in the fact that these creatures could die. Alina's dragon wheeled overhead, screeching in triumph. She had glimpsed the moment the Pale Lord fell. She guided her mount to another knot of White Walkers near the eastern flank, unleashing flame. Similarly, Ser Varen and Ser Leah coordinated to strike from multiple angles. Freed from the Pale Lord's direct mastery, the storm was weaker, allowing the dragons to land their fire with greater effect. Whites collapsed by the dozens, burned to ash, or cut down by renewed assaults from the living. Shouts of victory rose across the battered lines. Still, the fighting raged as more whites pressed in, directed by the remaining others. Cregan gathered the remnants of the men around him, many wounded, some near collapse. He recognized Harik the Crow among them, eyes blazing. "We push on," Harik growled, brandishing a dragaglass axe. "Finish them off." With that, they formed a wedge, hacking their way through the staggering undead. In the thick of it, Cregan saw Skara still standing, bruised and singed, but alive. She bared her teeth at a white lunging for her and impaled it on a broken spear. With the Pale Lord gone, the remaining others fought on, but without the same unstoppable momentum. One by one, the Targaryen dragons singled them out, forcing them to defend against columns of flame. Some shattered under dragonglass spear thrusts from wildling ambushes. Others were driven off, vanishing into a swirl of snow. The undead legion, no longer fully coordinated, began to collapse in pockets. Some whites simply wandered aimlessly until they were cut down. The battle felt endless, but gradually the tide turned. Fires raged across the valley, fed by pitch and dragon flame. The stench of charred flesh and melted ice hung thick in the frigid air. Bodies were piled in twisted heaps. The living pressed forward, driving the reanimated dead into lines of archers who rained dragonglass arrows on them. By the time midnight approached, a macabre hush had settled. The storm above dissipated into a scattered snowfall. In the flickering glow of the fires, men surveyed the carnage, hearts pounding. It was victory, but a dreadful one. Hundreds of the living lay dead or dying, scattered across the plain. Dozens of whites still twitched, half-burned, requiring final dispatch. The battered remnants of the White Walkers had fled into the darkness. Yet the largest threat, the Pale Lord, was gone. That alone felt like a near miracle. Cregan stood in the midst of the field, numb with shock and pain. His left shoulder was caked in frozen blood. Gon stumbled up, panting, supporting himself on a broken spear shaft. "We did it," he murmured. "Gods preserve us, we did it." Cregan's breath came shallow, the freezing air searing his lungs. "Check if the others remain." The Watchers, the Targaryen knights. Alina, he trailed off, scanning the gloom for the green dragon. In the distance, he saw the silhouette of a large beast perched on a rocky outcrop, still standing. That was enough to release a breath of relief. Then he looked around, spotting men rummaging among the bodies, offering mercy kills to the wounded whites and carrying back the badly hurt survivors. He trudged through the churned snow, ignoring his own pain, and found Harik the Crow kneeling beside Skara. She had taken a wound to her leg, but she was conscious, leaning her head back. She bared her teeth at Cregan in what might have been a grin. "We got one of them," she rasped. "Your father's gods watch over us, I guess." He nodded, strangely moved by her remark. "We'll find you a healer," he said. Then he looked about for a small cluster of men who might build a makeshift triage. He spotted Lord Commander Ethan, battered but alive, issuing orders to burn every corpse in sight, living or dead, friend or foe. "No more raising," Ethan barked. "Ensure they can't come back." Light from the burning piles illuminated the bleak scene like a vision of some netherworld. Cregan was about to assist when he heard a rush of wings overhead. The green dragon landed heavily in a space cleared by corpses, steaming breath wafting. Elena slid down, her own armor scorched in places, a look of pure exhaustion etched on her face. When she met Cregan's eyes, a flash of relief softened her fierce expression. "You're alive," she murmured. "I saw you fighting him. Are you badly hurt?" He grimaced, pressing a hand to his shoulder. "I'll manage. You saved my life, my lady. If not for that flame." She waved it off. "You struck the killing blow with Valyrian steel. Teamwork, one might say." Her gaze shifted to the devastation around them. "How many others did we slay? How many fled?" "I counted at least 3 turned to ice shards," Gawain offered, limping up behind them. 2 more disappeared into the night, from what the rangers said. The whites seem mostly destroyed or inert. "I suppose the rest are scattered." He gestured at the swirling gloom beyond the valley. "They might regroup. Or vanish for now." Elena's jaw tightened. "We must remain vigilant. But at least the Pale Lord, their champion, is no more." She exhaled a visible breath. "We've won a reprieve, if not a total victory. That might be enough." Men around them gathered. Some cheered when they realized the Targaryen lady and the Stark Lord had survived, that the dragons still stood. In the orange glow of pyres, battered fighters clasped arms in mutual relief. Free folk and black brothers alike stared at each other with a new camaraderie that only shared horror could forge. They were all survivors of something that few in Westeros would ever believe. As the fires raged through the night, the living set to the grim work of finishing off any twitching whites, gathering their own dead, and tending to the wounded. Here and there, the moans of dying men blended with the crackle of flames. Cregan helped where he could, ignoring his pain until at last a maester from the watch insisted on dressing his wounded shoulder. He endured the sting of hot wine poured over the cut, relief flooding him once it was bound. Then, near dawn, he slumped onto a hastily laid bedroll among the wounded, losing consciousness to exhaustion. He dreamed of swirling snow, of his father's face as it had been in the final weeks of his life, haunted, resolute, speaking of a prophecy no one else could truly fathom. Then the image drifted away, replaced by flickers of dragons and White Walkers. He woke with a start to find daybreak had cast a pale glow over the valley. Smoke still lingered in the air. Stiffly, he forced himself upright. A quick glance around showed that many had collapsed from fatigue, though some still stood watch at the perimeter. Harik the Crow was conversing with a Targaryen knight near the scorched remains of the undead. Gawain dozed on a pile of cloaks, his wounded leg bandaged. The green dragon perched at the far end of the field, resting but vigilant, while the silver and dark dragons soared in wide arcs overhead, presumably scouting for any sign of a returning threat. Maester Ethan, who had guided the watch's side of the battle, approached him. "Lord Cregan, we've begun counting the cost," he said quietly. "We lost more than half our number, though that's better than total annihilation. The free folk and your northern men are in similar shape. The dragons proved decisive, but also sustained injuries. One is favoring a wing, though it's still flying." Cregan rubbed his bleary eyes. "Any trace of more others?" "We found the bodies of 3. Shattered ice, really? At least 2 vanished, but whether they truly fled or perished unseen, we can't say. The good news is, we've not spotted any new whites. Seems the Legion was reliant on the Pale Lord's guidance. That's a relief, though I doubt we can let our guard down fully." Cregan pushed to his feet, wincing at the twinge in his shoulder. "We should gather the commanding parties, see what next steps are needed." Ethan agreed. Not long after, a small council formed at the edge of the battlefield where the ground was less churned by footprints and bodies. Elena Targaryen was there, looking weary yet composed. Ser Varen and Ser Leah stood at her side, arms folded. Gawain limped up, supported by a staff. Skara and Harik represented the free folk. The Lord Commander was too injured to attend. He had taken a nasty slash to the side, but sent one of his top rangers in his stead. Elena began quietly, voice carrying in the hush of mourning. "We have dealt a massive blow to the army of the dead. The Pale Lord is destroyed. Though others remain, they have lost their figurehead and their legion of whites is scattered. This is a victory of monumental importance. She paused, glancing around. But we must decide what now. The North cannot remain on a permanent war footing out here. Winter is savage, and we have wounded to tend. Harik let out a humorless chuckle. What now? Many free folk remain scattered across the land. Some are still fleeing. Some may be hiding in caves, refusing to believe they're safe. We'll need time to gather survivors. We might as well do it with your help while the others cower. Skara, leaning on a crutch, nodded. We'll search for our kin, see who we can save. But we have no desire to freeze out here. If the others are truly weakened, maybe your wall can hold any that remain at bay. Or maybe we stay on your side until we see how this plays out. No one objected to that possibility, though the idea of thousands of free folk crossing into the North would spark complicated questions. Yet in the face of a threat like the others, old enmities mattered less. They had all bled and fought side by side. Cregan spoke up, his voice rough from fatigue. I'll not turn away men, women, and children who need shelter. But we must do so in an orderly fashion, or the North will be overrun. Perhaps we can arrange safe passage for those who wish to come south, so long as they lay down arms and abide by the laws we set. Harik and Skara exchanged looks. Neither seemed pleased at the notion of bending to kneelers, but they also recognized they had little choice. Survival outweighed pride. We'll discuss terms, Harik said curtly. Elena glanced at Cregan. Our dragons cannot linger here forever. Once we're sure the immediate threat is ended, we'll return to Dragonstone. But I will leave behind a small contingent of Targaryen knights to help fortify the wall. If the others rise again, you must send word immediately. We proved they can be killed. If more appear, we'll bring fire again. Cregan inclined his head in gratitude. You have our thanks. I can speak only for House Stark, but I believe my fellow lords will be thankful as well, even if they have misgivings about dragons in the North. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. This alliance may well define the future. Fire and ice, side by side. She smiled back, weary but genuine. Just as your father foretold. In the days that followed, the valley near the Milkwater became a hub of recovery efforts. Burn pits devoured the final remains of the whites. Healers treated the wounded. The dragons prowled overhead, scanning for any renewed threats, but no large force of undead materialized. Rangers ventured farther north, reporting only the occasional lone white stumbling aimlessly until it was destroyed. Whether the remaining others had retreated deeper into the lands of always winter or scattered in small groups, none could say for certain. But the imminent danger was past. Some free folk did indeed gather to the valley, forming a ragged caravan that marched south under watchful escort. Harik, Skara, and a handful of their warriors served as leaders, ensuring that raids or lawlessness were minimized. They carried with them a solemn respect for the black cloaks and northern men who had bled beside them against the nightmares in the snow. As for Cregan, once he could ride without wincing at every movement, he joined Elena Targaryen on a short flight over the battlefield, his first experience on Dragonback. She insisted that he see the extent of the devastation from the air, as well as the resilience of the living. The green dragon snorted at the unfamiliar weight, but Elena spoke calm words, and it tolerated him behind her on the saddle. They soared above the plains, seeing miles of churned snow and blackened swaths where pyres had burned. Farther to the north, the land stretched bleak and empty, dotted with the silhouettes of mountains. Cregan shivered in the bitter wind, though part of it was awe. From such a height, the world looked vast and silent, as if no sign of war had ever touched it except for the columns of smoke rising from below. When they landed, he dismounted gingerly, his legs trembling. Elena dismounted more gracefully, patting the dragon's flank. You see how fragile we all are in such an expanse, she said quietly, but also how much we can accomplish when we stand together. A lesson for all realms, I'd say. Cregan offered a faint smile. A lesson I'll not soon forget. Eventually, after ensuring that the area was secure, the combined host made its way back south in stages. A portion of the Targaryen knights and 2 of the dragons accompanied them as far as Castle Black, while Serlia, with the darkest dragon, performed wide sweeps along the Frostfangs, searching for any major sign of the others. None emerged. Either the White Walkers had been whittled down to near nothingness, or they had slipped away to bide their time once more. None could say for sure, but the victory was undeniable. At Castle Black, the battered men found renewed warmth and a measure of celebration. The Night's Watch, though crippled by losses, was honored by the presence of living legends, dragon riders who had fought by their side. Some black brothers joked that the watch should adopt a dragon as a new sigil, though they quickly thought better of it, respecting centuries of tradition. Meanwhile, the free folk caravan passed through the wall, under strict oversight from Cregan and the other northern lords, carrying the wounded and sick. Some complained, but most recognized that House Stark was extending a hand of mercy rarely seen before. In the aftermath, Lady Olenna Targaryen and her riders took their leave, with Cregan's sincere thanks and a promise of continued cooperation. Before she departed, Olenna met privately with Cregan atop the wall, the wind whipping around them in a swirl of crystalline snow. Looking out over the endless white expanses to the north, she said, "Should the others rise again, do not hesitate to call us. My house stands ready to protect the realm from any threat, as your father and I once agreed." Cregan nodded solemnly. "We will, and if we ever sense that the old gods stir with new portents, we'll send word. We are bound, House Stark and House Targaryen, by ties deeper than most can fathom." She regarded him with respect, then drew a single silver ring from her pocket, a band etched with faint draconic runes. "Take this as a token. If you send it to Dragonstone, we will know your call is true, and may the realm never require such measures again." She pressed it into his hand. He accepted it, feeling the smooth, cold metal. "Thank you. May we keep the peace together." She mounted her dragon soon after. The watchers along the wall stood in silent wonder as Olenna's green beast, followed by the silver one, launched into the sky. The third dragon, left behind for a time, would remain with a small contingent of Targaryen knights to help oversee the new, tenuous peace with the free folk. But Olenna herself soared southward, dwindling into a distant speck against the gray clouds. Thus began a new chapter for the north. The free folk integrated slowly, settling some lands along the Gift under Stark oversight. Occasionally, fights broke out. Generations of bad blood could not be undone overnight, but Cregan maintained firm justice, punishing crimes without regard for whether the guilty wore furs or wool. The Night's Watch, diminished in numbers, received more recruits from among the free folk and from northern villages alarmed by the threat they had nearly faced. Word of the battle against the Pale Lord spread through the north. Some doubted the tales. Others whispered of it in hushed awe, crediting the combined might of dragon flame and Stark valor. As the year wore on, the winds grew less bitter, and talk of the others receded into the realm of rumor once more. But Cregan and those who had fought in the Valley of the Milkwater never forgot the horrors they witnessed. Nor did they let their guard down. Watchtowers along the wall were strengthened, and caches of dragoglass were stored at strategic points. The free folk who had lost their homes beyond the wall spread stories of the living dead, ensuring that new generations would not dismiss it as mere legend. Cregan himself returned to Winterfell, where Alyssa welcomed him with tears of relief. Their son Torrhen, now a rambunctious toddler, laughed to see his father again, though he stared in fascination at the bandages still swathing Cregan's shoulder. Over time, the wounds healed, leaving a scar that ached whenever a cold wind blew. Cregan regarded it as a reminder of how close the realm had come to destruction and how, once again, House Stark had played a pivotal part in staving off doom. In the godwood of Winterfell, beneath the ancient weirwood's carved face, Cregan knelt one evening, the hush of falling snow wrapping the courtyard in silence. He touched the trunk as his father had done so many times and let out a measured breath. "Father," he murmured, voice low, "I have done what I could. Perhaps the realm has another chance at peace. I wonder if you foresaw this, if you knew we'd face a darkness of ice. Maybe it was always coming. The Targaryens helped us as you once helped them bring about Valyria's doom. Perhaps one day, if the realm faces new perils, we'll all stand together again. Fire and ice, bound by necessity. The old gods are silent as always, but I know you watch from wherever you are. We made it through the storm." The weirwood's face, with its ancient, sorrowful eyes, said nothing. Yet Cregan felt a subtle shifting in the wind, almost a sense of acknowledgement. He smiled, closing his eyes to let the calm wash over him. For a moment, the swirl of memories, Valyria, the others, the dragons, hung in his thoughts, a tapestry of mortal choices shaped by prophecy. Then he stood, exhaling into the cold air, and turned back toward the castle. Winterfell's torches glimmered with inviting warmth. Life moved on as it always did. In the months that followed, stories spread throughout Westeros, reaching even the distant corners of the Reach, Dorne, and the Stormlands. Some dismissed these tales as northern exaggerations, unable to believe that the dead had truly walked or that dragons had soared to the realm's defense. But more than a few took note. Ship captains from White Harbor carried rumors across the sea to Bravos and Pentos, and eventually, quiet whispers reached the ears of those who studied ancient lore. A handful recalled that the doom of Valyria had once been prophesied, that dragons had shaped the fate of kingdoms before. In Dragonstone, Elena received occasional ravens from Winterfell, updates on the stable relationship with the free folk, on the walls vigilant watch on further sightings of whites, which so far proved small and easily dispatched. She took solace in these messages, convinced that this alliance of Stark and Targaryen had fulfilled something her ancestors had dreamed of, a united front against the primal evils of the world. Perhaps she wondered if Daenerys the Dreamer, who once foresaw Valyria's end, had also glimpsed a time when Targaryen fire would combine with Stark resolve to banish the bitter cold. But no new letter from Cregan indicated an immediate threat, and she let her dragons rest, focusing on matters at Dragonstone and King's Landing, where the realm's tangled politics churned as always. For the North, time proved kinder than many expected. Harvests, though meager, kept people fed. The memory of the White Onslaught and the Pale Lord's fall bound houses together in an unspoken accord. While minor feuds still arose, none escalated to the point of civil war. Even houses like Bolton, who once bristled at Stark authority, realized that the threat of the others had been real and that unity was paramount. The free folk integration was not seamless, but the necessity of the situation forced tolerance on both sides. Skara traveled often between newly founded free folk settlements and Winterfell, forging a role as a negotiator. Harik the Crow eventually settled in a modest keep near the new gift, helping to keep roving bandits at bay. They named the area Frost Hearth, a nod to the blending of cold lands and the warmth of new alliances. Cregan's personal life also found renewed stability. He began training Torrhen in the courtyard, a wooden sword clutched in the boy's tiny hands. Alyssa teased him about turning the child into a warrior before he could even read his letters. Cregan would only smile wryly, recalling how vulnerable he felt facing the White Walkers. He intended to ensure his son never took safety for granted. The old gods might demand harsh duties of House Stark once again. Sometimes Cregan woke in the middle of the night, cold sweat on his brow, recalling the Pale Lord's blue eyes and the searing cold of that frost blade biting into his shoulder. Or he remembered how easily the others had deflected lesser attacks and how many men had died in that valley. Guilt tugged at him. He'd replay each decision, each sacrifice, wondering if they could have saved more had they known more, or planned better, or if the old gods themselves were simply implacable. Then he would breathe, remember that the living had emerged victorious, and that for the moment the night held no footsteps of the dead. Seasons turned, and ravens from the Night's Watch became more routine once again, reports of minor wildling skirmishes, sightings of dire wolves, an odd rumor of a giant seen near the mountains. Nothing pointed to the immediate return of the White Walkers. Some watchers grew complacent. Lord Commander Ethan, older and weakened by injuries, stepped down after a few years, replaced by a younger officer who carried the memory of the battle in his scars. Together, they maintained rigorous patrols beyond the wall, clearing out stray whites whenever found. The new Lord Commander also cooperated with Free Folk Scouts, ensuring lines of communication that had never existed before. House Stark quietly funded these efforts, sending supplies and manpower. One did not survive a brush with the apocalypse, only to starve the Guardians who stood watch in the aftermath. Over time, the rest of Westeros only half believed the stories, dismissing them as northern tall tales. The lords in the south were far more preoccupied with their own rivalries and ambitions. Yet a few traveling singers spun ballads of the dragons and the dead, weaving half-true verses about a pale king of ice, a ring of watchers, and a final stand in swirling snow. Children in the Riverlands whispered those songs around the hearth. Nobody truly expected the White Walkers to come for them, not with the unbreakable wall and the rumored might of dragons defending the realm's northern border. Through it all, Cregan's hair turned from dark to salt and pepper, his face lined by care and memory. He grew into a respected lord, widely regarded as fair, if somewhat haunted. When visitors from distant regions inquired about the rumor that he had killed a mythical being, he typically changed the subject. It never felt like a triumph to boast of. Too many had died, and the threat might only be slumbering. Still, in unguarded moments, he would sometimes hold the Valyrian steel dagger. Freshly honed, the name Icebane scratched into the hilt and recall the instant it sank into the Pale Lord's chest. He prayed that if the others ever rose again, future generations would be ready with the knowledge, the alliances, and the will to meet them. And so the North settled into a wary peace, forging a legacy of unity among the houses, the Night's Watch, and the free folk. Each winter night that passed uneventfully felt like a gift bought with blood and dragon flame. The old gods, silent in their ancient weirwoods, seemed content at least for now. In quiet corners of Winterfell, the rumor persisted that Brandon Stark's ghost walked the crypts, smiling sadly at the knowledge that his son had upheld the prophecy of fire and ice. Some said the ghost vanished from time to time, carrying a deep burden as if watching for other storms on the horizon. In the end, it was never truly over. The watchers on the wall knew that darkness might linger beyond the edge of sight, that the White Walkers were not a foe easily eradicated. But in that generation, at least, the living had a chance to breathe, to rebuild, to plant fields and raise children in relative safety. As the winds howled across the tundra, swirling snow into sculpted drifts, the memory of the Pale Lord's downfall remained a testament to mortal courage and to the extraordinary alliances forged when the realm's very existence hung in the balance. A hush fell over the far north, broken only by the distant cries of ravens and the crackle of ice in the rivers. Though twisted shapes still lurked in the remotest wastes, no new legion marched south. The battles died into legend, overshadowed by the usual tides of politics and minor wars in the southern kingdoms. Yet House Stark continued to watch, always mindful that prophecies, once awakened, seldom slumber forever. Sometimes, when Cregan walked alone through the Winterfell Godwood on a cold, moonlit night, he would feel a presence at his shoulder, an echo of his father's spirit, or perhaps just the memory of ancient powers that guided them once. In those moments, he would place a hand upon the weirwood's trunk and speak softly to the carved face. He spoke not just of the burdens they had carried but of the hope they had managed to salvage, the free folk living in the gift, the Watch forging a new era of cooperation, the Targaryens holding to their promise. Dragons poised to defend the realm should nightmares rise again. The tree never answered except in the way the wind sighed through its crimson leaves. But that for him was enough. In the quiet of that sacred grove he found a measure of peace, knowing that if the old gods or the new ever demanded another sacrifice, House Stark would stand ready. They had once brought about the doom of Valyria to save the world from fire, they had now faced the others to save it from ice. Though the cost had been incalculable, the realm still endured. That had to be worth all the sorrow and the blood. So ended one chapter of the realm's long and winding story, a chapter that might never be recorded in the official annals, for who among the maesters would fully believe it? Yet in the hearts of those who survived, in the hush of winter nights and the crackle of the godswood's branches, the truth remained. Prophecy was a sword without a hilt, and the old gods demanded harsh duties of those who heard their call. But in the union of Dragonfire and Stark steel, at the edge of the world's coldest domain, the living had prevailed once more, proving that, however vast the darkness, mortal courage could still shape the destiny of Westeros. And far beyond the wall, in the silent wastes where snowfall never ceased, fragments of ice and bone slept beneath the drifts. Shards of armor from fallen walkers lay scattered, slowly eroding in the bitter wind. Occasionally, the wind would rise in a lonely lament, drifting over uncharted ridges, carrying echoes of distant storms and half-forgotten evils. But for a time at least, no blue eyes glowed amid the gloom, no legion of the dead stirred to march again. The realm was safe, if only until the next great turning of fate. In that lull, men lived and loved and struggled, forging new bonds against whatever tomorrow might bring. House Stark kept its oath to guard the north, to remember the price their forebears paid, and to hold the realm's safety above all else. House Targaryen, now anchored on Dragonstone and beyond, carried on with their dragons, ever watchful, ever ready to bring fire against any threat that rose. And so the world spun on, perched between fire and ice, hope and despair, memory and prophecy. In the stillness of the godwood, the old gods watched and waited, the red leaves rustling secrets no living ear could fully comprehend. Yet for now, at least, the dawn came each day and the night retreated, ushering an uneasy peace in the wake of the doom that had not come to pass.